In the beginning, there was no dawn, only twilight without origin. The sky was neither black nor blue, but a color that wounded the eyes to name. It hung over the world like an unfinished thought, trembling on the edge of becoming. The mountains stood as bones of a dream half forgotten by the gods, and the seas whispered to themselves, remembering light as if it were a rumor. The world was tired of waiting for the morning that never came. Wind crept across the plains, searching for something it could not define. Perhaps warmth, perhaps sound. But it found only frost. Trees bent under the silence until their trunks cracked. Rivers froze not from cold, but from exhaustion. The sun, if it had ever existed, had withdrawn beyond memory, leaving only a faint residue, a smudge of gold on the underbelly of the clouds that refused to brighten. In this world of dim eternity, Fenrin was born, not from a mother's womb, but from the breath of winter itself. They said he came crawling out of a glacier that split open with a groan like a dying god. His fur was white as the forgotten stars, his eyes two shards of the northern sea. He was the first living thing to howl since the silence began, and when he did, the air trembled as though it remembered music. The creatures that still lingered, the pale stags, the hollow-eyed ravens, lifted their heads to listen, sensing something ancient stirring beneath the numbness. Fenrin was a wolf, yes, but something more, a fragment of the world's last instinct to live. He wandered through valleys drowned in dusk, where shadows had no masters and echoes whispered names that had never belonged to him. He hunted not for food, but for proof that something still moved, that something still breathed beyond the cold. His paws left prints that glowed faintly, as though light remembered where it had once been. Days and nights had long since lost their meaning. Time was a flat, frozen sea. Then, one evening that was no different from the rest, because every evening was the same, Fenrin looked up and saw that the stars were gone. At first, he thought it was the mist. The world was often wrapped in its own breath, hiding its scars. But no, the mist was there, yes, yet beyond it there was nothing. No pinpricks of silver, no eyes of the dead gods watching from afar. The constellations that once told stories of hunters and serpents, lovers and odes, all had been swallowed. It was as if the sky itself had forgotten how to remember. Fenrin's howl broke the air again, long and raw. It echoed through forests that no longer grew, across rivers that no longer ran, over mountains that had forgotten their names. But there was no answer. The world listened, then went back to its sleep. He began to walk. He walked for 7 nights, or perhaps 7 centuries, for time is soft in the absence of light. The ground turned to glass beneath his feet. The horizon bent and shimmered, revealing mirages of what the world used to be. Once, he thought he saw the sun dying on the sea. Another time, he saw his own reflection walking beside him, older, crowned with frost. At last, he came upon a ruin, a circle of monoliths jutting from the earth like broken teeth. There were carvings on them, faint but still legible, spirals, runes, and the figure of a wolf biting the moon. In the center stood a shape of shadow, tall, cloaked, and breathing smoke. "You came," it said. Its voice sounded like snow collapsing from a roof. Fenrin did not speak. Wolves seldom do, but the being understood his silence. "The stars have vanished," it continued, "and now everything above begins to rot. The gods are afraid." Fenrin's fur bristled. The air tasted of iron. "They blame mortals," the figure said. "Mortals and their hunger. Burned prayers that once fed the heavens. They turned belief into noise. They broke the bridge that bound sky and soul." "And the ghosts?" Fenrin asked, his voice a low growl that shivered the stones. The figure's face shifted in the dark. "The ghosts blame themselves. They think their sorrow drowned the light." Silence again, the kind that does not wait to be broken. At last, the figure raised its hand and pointed toward the northern horizon, where the sky pulsed faintly as though trying to breathe. "If the stars are to return, someone must go where even gods do not tread. Someone who remembers what came before the first dawn. You, Fenrin, born of frost and silence, you're the last creature the world still listens to." The wolf's gaze followed the gesture. In the far distance, beyond the endless plain, a faint column of darkness rose upward, twisting like smoke that fell instead of rising. "What lies there?" Fenrin asked. "The heart of the sky," said the figure, "or its grave." And so he began his hunt, not for prey, but for light. He crossed the dead ice, where the corpses of ancient titans lay frozen mid-breath. Their ribs formed arches like cathedrals, their eyes hollow wells where stars once hid. He passed through forests of bone and frost, where ghost birds sang songs of warmth they'd never felt. He climbed mountains that bled mist instead of snow. Along the way, he met others, remnants of what life had once been. A blind doe that saw only in memories. A crow whose feathers were written with lost constellations. A child carved from ice, who whispered dreams into the wind before melting into it. Each spoke to him of the same thing. The light had been stolen. By whom, none could say. The gods, from their crumbling halls, sent omens. They forged storms and frustration, hurling lightning across an empty sky to remind the world of their anger. But mortals, those few who still huddled around dying fires, blamed the dead. They said the ghosts had grown jealous of the living and devoured the heavens to make their night eternal. No one spoke of truth anymore. Truth had gone the way of the dawn. Fenrin pressed on. He had no choice. For each night he walked, the darkness thickened. Not merely the absence of light, but a thing alive. It watched him, whispering through cracks in the air. Once, he turned and saw a footprint beside his own, made of shadow, echoing his every step a heartbeat behind. When he stopped, they stopped. When he ran, they followed. On the seventh crossing of the seventh plane, he reached the edge of the world. There was no cliff, no barrier, only a shimmer, the horizon folding inward like a wound. The sky was a mirror turned inward, and in it he saw not himself but 1,000 wolves, all walking toward him from other worlds. Each bore the same eyes, the same hunger. Each had lost their stars. And above them something moved. It was vast, too vast for form, too slow for time. It pulsed in the firmament like a sleeping heart. Each beat shaking the horizon. When it exhaled, the clouds fled. When it stirred, the constellations flickered for an instant, as if recalling their purpose. Fenrin raised his head. The scent was unmistakable. It was divine. He howled, not as a beast, but as a question. The sound climbed the air, searching, demanding, and from within that cosmic shroud, something answered, a sound between thunder and laughter, old as gravity. A voice rolled down through the dark. "You hunt the sky, little wolf. But what will you do if you catch it?" Fenrin bared his teeth. "I will make it bleed light again." The laughter deepened. "Then come. But know this. The light was never stolen. It was hidden. By whom? By those who fear what it showed. The wolf's fur rippled in the cosmic wind. The truth was a blade, and he'd already stepped onto its edge. Then I will find it," Fenrin vowed, "even if I must tear the heavens apart." The voice smiled through the void. So spoke the first wolf who ever dared to love the dawn. And then it was gone. He descended into the shimmer. It was not falling, but dissolving, his body breaking into mist and memory. The world peeled away like bark. Beneath it lay another, older world, molten, radiant, unfinished. Here, stars floated in cages of crystal. Rivers of fire flowed through the roots of the cosmos. Every sound was a prayer half-formed. In the center of it all hung the ring of sky, a vast circle of molten silver, pulsing like a heartbeat. Around it circled beings of smoke and bone, their wings tattered, their faces veiled. They turned toward him as one, recognizing something neither living nor dead. "Another seeker," one whispered. "Another fool," said another. "Another hope," murmured the third. Fenrin stood before them, unflinching. "I seek the light." The being stirred. The light does not wish to be found. It hides within sorrow now. It fled when God began to lie and mortals began to forget. "Then I will remember for them," he said. And with that, he leapt into the ring. Pain, not the pain of wound, but of creation, the ache of form realizing it is temporary. He saw everything at once. The first dawn breaking over a newborn sea, the first lie whispered by a god's tongue, the first mortal who wept because the sun set too soon. He saw the stars being born from the tears of a goddess who had loved a wolf once. Long ago, he saw himself reflected in her tears. And then he understood. The stars had not vanished. They had returned to her. The goddess of sorrow, who wept for the world's forgetfulness. Her tears had become stars once. But when mortals stopped mourning, when they numbed their hearts to pain, she had withdrawn her grief. Without grief, there can be no light. Without loss, no dawn. The gods blame mortals. Mortals blame ghosts. But the truth was balance. Fenrir, creature of frost and silence, carried both. He looked up at the void, now trembling with faint light, and whispered to no one, "If I must teach them to weep again, then let my howl be their prayer." And somewhere in that endless twilight, the first star blinked awake. Thus began the hunt of Fenrir, the wolf who chased the dawn. The valley of Ardal had always been a quiet place. Too quiet, the elders whispered, a bowl of silence carved between mountains that never stopped watching. Each morning the mist rose like a ghost trying to remember its own name, and each evening it settled again, unwilling to let the stars pierce through. The sheep grazed without bleating. Even their bells had long fallen mute. Sound seemed to fade there faster than elsewhere, as if swallowed by something unseen. Lyra was born into that hush. Her mother said she came into the world during the long twilight, when day and night could not agree who should reign. She grew up beneath a sky that never fully brightened, her hair carrying the smell of smoke and milk, her hands always smelling of wool. She learned to read the weather by the way frost clung to the heather, and to count hours by how long the sun's ghosts lingered behind the peaks. But Lyra was not like the other shepherd children. She was listening. While others heard only wind, she heard patterns, breaths that rose and fell with intention. When she tilted her head just so, she could make out syllables. And when she lay awake at night, staring through the cracks of the roof, she could swear that the air above the world was murmuring. At first, she thought it was the gods. Then she thought it was madness. The first time she told her mother, the woman pressed a finger to her lips. "Do not speak of voices, child. The sky is thin here. When you listen too closely, something might listen back." Lyra nodded, but silence could not hold her curiosity for long. Each day she took her flock higher into the hills, to places where the wind was raw and unshaped. There, she would sit for hours, eyes closed, letting the air wrap around her. It came in bursts, like weeping that didn't know how to stop. One evening, as she rested near the ridge of Jornfell, she finally understood the words. They weren't human. They weren't divine. They were celestial. "We are unmade." The wind sobbed through the grass. "The map is broken. We have lost our places." She froze. The flock stirred nervously, stamping the frozen ground. The air thickened with a hum that felt like grief made tangible. When she opened her eyes, she saw something impossible. Faint lights moving across the sky, not stars, but fragments of them, shards of brightness wandering aimlessly through the void like birds that had forgotten migration. They pulsed once, twice, and vanished. That night, she could not sleep. The words gnawed at her, soft as lullabies but sharp as longing. The constellations were crying. She was sure of it. But for what? For whom? She decided to follow. The next morning, Lyra left before dawn, though dawn no longer meant anything. She wrapped her cloak tight, tucked her knife into her belt, and set out toward the northern hills. The air grew colder with every step, yet the wind guided her like a song. Sometimes it whispered clearly, sometimes it broke into fragments, but always pointed forward. South of silence, it murmured. North of flame, where frost burns and shadows breathe. The phrase repeated until it became her heartbeat. By midday, she reached the edge of her known world, the Vale of Stones. Shepherds avoided it, claiming it was cursed. From afar, it looked like a field of pillars, hundreds of black spires piercing the mist, their tips glowing faintly blue. Nothing grew there. Even the snow refused to fall within its boundary, as if the air itself were too heavy for flakes to carry. Lyra stepped forward. The moment she crossed the invisible border, the temperature shifted, not colder, but sharper, as though the air had turned into glass. Frost began to crawl up the stones, not white but luminous, burning with blue fire. The ground hissed where she placed her feet. Her breath left silver trails that hung in place, frozen midair like threads of memory. She felt watched, not by eyes, but by the silence. Do you seek what fell? The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. Lyra spun around, knife drawn. The flock she had left behind was gone. Even her footprints vanished as she turned. The sky above seemed deeper, closer, its colors shifting like oil. Between one blink and the next, she wasn't sure if she was standing still or falling upward. Who's there? She demanded, though her voice sounded too small, too alive for this place. The answer came in the shape of a shadow moving through frost. He emerged like a memory thawing from ice, large, pale, silent. A wolf, though not merely a wolf. His fur shimmered faintly, catching light that shouldn't have existed, and his eyes held storms she could not name. Steam curled from his paws where they touched the frozen ground, and when he breathed, the air around him seemed to ripple as if recognizing its maker. Lyra froze. Her knife trembled. The wolf stopped a few paces away, head tilted, studying her as though she were the apparition. Neither moved, neither blinked. At last Lyra whispered, "You're real." The wolf's voice came not from his mouth, but from the space between heartbeats. "Am I?" The sound nearly undid her. It wasn't speech. It was meaning forced into shape. She took a step back. "You spoke." "And you heard," he replied. Few could any more. The wind swirled between them, tugging at her cloak, carrying echoes of voices. Distant, fractured, pleading. Lyra gathered her courage. "I followed them. The cries. The ones in the wind. They said the stars were lost." The wolf's eyes flickered. "Then you've come too far." "Too far from what?" "From forgetting." For a long time, they stood in silence. The ruin around them seemed to breathe. The pillars exhaled faint mist, and frost dripped upward like reverse rain. Lyra's knife melted in her hand, leaving her unarmed. The wolf lowered his head, and she saw symbols etched along his muzzle, runes that pulsed with dull light. "What are you?" she asked. A question that no longer expected an answer. That's not an answer. That's all that's left. Lyra frowned. "You have a name?" The wolf hesitated, then spoke it like a sigh. "Fenrin." She repeated it quietly, feeling how the name hummed against her teeth. "Fenrin, that's old speech. My grandmother used to tell of a spirit by that name, a guardian of dawn who hunted the sky. The hunt is not done," Fenrin said, gaze lifting toward the dim heavens. "Only forgotten." Lyra followed his stare. The clouds churned slowly, exposing brief flashes of light that weren't lightning, more like dying embers scattered across infinity. She realized those were the constellations, struggling against something unseen. Their patterns broke, reformed, broke again. "Can you hear them?" she asked. "I always have," said Fenrin. "They remember me, though they shouldn't." "Then why do they cry?" "Because they've been erased. The world has lost its map. Every mortal's disbelief tears a piece of the sky apart. The stars fall and the gods call it fate." Lyra shook her head. "I don't understand. How can disbelief destroy the heavens?" Fenrin turned to her. "The same way silence kills a song." The frost brightened around them. Somewhere deep beneath the stones, a pulse began, slow, seismic, resonant. It matched the rhythm of their breaths. Lyra felt it in her ribs, her fingertips, behind her eyes. It was like being watched by the heartbeat of the world. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "Why could I hear them?" Fenrin regarded her for a long moment. "Because you still listen, and because you're the daughter of silence." "My mother—" "Not your mother," he interrupted gently. "The silence that made her womb ache before you were born. The same stillness that birthed me. We are kin, you and I, though we wear different skins." The words frightened her, yet something deep inside agreed. Since childhood she had felt apart from others, as though her heartbeat was tuned to an older rhythm. Now she knew it wasn't madness. It was inheritance. "What happens now?" she asked. "The wind has chosen you," Fenrin said. "The stars remember through you. But memory is pain. If you carry it, you may never return." "Return where?" "To the world that forgets." A tremor shook the ground. Frost erupted into flames, blue, soundless, devouring nothing. Shadows detached from the pillars and drifted upward, forming shapes almost human but hollow-eyed. They circled Fenrin and Lyra like mourners at a funeral that had never ended. "Who are they?" Lyra whispered. "Echoes of those who once prayed to light," Fenrin said. "They wait for dawn, though it will not come without cost." The ghosts turned their faces toward her, their mouths open, but instead of voices came starlight, threads of brilliance that wove together above the ruin, forming a pattern half remembered, a constellation trying to be born again. The sight brought tears to Lyra's eyes. "They want to live," she murmured. "They want to be remembered," said Fenrin. "But memory demands sacrifice." "What kind?" "Yours." The light faded. The ghost fell back into shadow. Only one remained, a faint shape of a woman, her face made of snowflakes that refused to melt. She reached out to Lyra, hand trembling, and whispered through the wind, "Find her heart." "Whose heart?" Lyra asked, stepping forward. But the ghost was gone. Fenrin's eyes narrowed. "The goddess." "What goddess?" "The one who weeps stars," he said softly. "She hid them when the world ceased to grieve. I sought her once, long ago, and failed. Perhaps you will not." The word struck her like prophecy and wound. She felt the world tilt beneath her, the air thickening into meaning. "Then you're real," she said again, though the question trembled inside it. Fenrin looked at her with something that might have been sorrow. "Perhaps you're the dream," he said. "Perhaps I'm the echo of your courage." She smiled faintly despite the fear. "Then let the dream keep walking." They left the ruin together. As they crossed back through the frost fire field, the air behind them sealed like water. The stones dimmed, the runes vanished. Yet in the distance, the wind carried a new note, low, rising, almost hopeful. Lyra realized the constellations were singing again, faintly. Not crying, not lost, calling. Fenrin turned north. The sky waits there, between dawns. Lyra followed, her steps leaving traces of warmth on the frozen ground. The wind gathered around them, weaving their breaths into one sound, half howl, half prayer. And somewhere above the world, a forgotten star flickered back to life. The villagers would later say they saw two shapes crossing the northern ridges at night, a girl with light in her hair and a wolf made of mist. The next morning, the frost on every window bore the same pattern, a wolf and a star intertwined. None could explain it. Few remembered, but the wind did. And in that memory, Lyra and Fenrin walked on, uncertain whether the other was real, but certain that together they had heard the universe breathe again. It began with thunder that had no sound. The air thickened, trembling as though the world itself drew breath for the first time in centuries. The light above the frozen plain flickered, uncertain whether to be dawn or flame. Fenrin stopped mid-step. His fur rose along his spine. His shadow split in two. Even the wind went still, folding upon itself like a creature hiding from its master. Lyra felt it too, the pull in her lungs, the ache behind her eyes. Something vast was descending. The horizon cracked open, and out of it poured radiance. Not warmth, not mercy, but presence. It took shape slowly, condensing from brilliance into form. A figure of a man, tall and terrible, his body clothed in light that refused to settle. His eyes were wounds in the world, pouring gold. Where his feet touched the earth, the frost hissed into steam. And though his mouth never moved, his words were thunder made flesh. "Fenrin." The wolf lowered his head, lips curling. "You remember my name." "I remember your defiance," said the god. "You were made to guard the balance, not to hunt the sky. Your broken covenant with creation." Lyra's knees weakened beneath the weight of his gaze. The god's voice was not heard but felt, a vibration in bone, a command older than fear. She wanted to kneel, but Fenrin did not bow. His eyes burned pale, the color of storms. "I guarded light until the gods abandoned it," he growled. "Now I hunt what you lost." "You hunt what was taken for reason," said the god. "The stars were hidden to protect the mortal world from remembrance. Too much truth burns." "Better to burn than forget," Fenrin answered. The god's face shifted, pity, sorrow, wrath. "You would undo the veils of mercy. The dawn you seek would blind all hearts to peace. I cannot allow that." Lightning split the sky. No sound followed, yet the ground rippled with force. Lyra staggered back, shielding her eyes. Fenrin stepped forward, teeth bared, for lifting like flame. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer only his. It carried the resonance of every creature that had ever howled against the dying of light. Then end me, God of silence, Fenrin said. But the stars will still cry your name in shame. The god raised his hand, and light gathered within it. Not brightness, but purity distilled, too sacred for mortal sight. Lyra felt her skin sear, just from the reflection. Fenrin crouched, ready to spring, but she saw something in his eyes, not anger, but inevitability. He knew he could not win. The divine would extinguish him, and with him, the last echo of the hunt. Without thought, she stepped between them. The god hesitated. His power dimmed slightly, confused by the intrusion of such smallness. A shepherd's daughter, hair tangled, cloak torn, breath clouding before her in the cold, standing before eternity. Move aside, said the god. This is not your quarrel. It is now, Lyra said, voice trembling but steady. You call his hunt defiance, yet without it, there will be no dawn. Without dawn, there will be no you. You do not understand what you defend. Maybe not, but I understand what silence costs. Her words startled both beings, mortal daring cutting through divine logic. Fenrin snarled low. Lyra, go. This is beyond you. She turned to him, eyes bright with something that might have been madness or faith. Then let me reach beyond. The god's light grew sharper. He cannot be saved. His soul is fractured, bound to the frost that birthed him. To preserve the world, he must end. Lyra looked from the god to the wolf, the creature who had walked with her through cold and whisper, who had heard her silence and not turned away. Something ancient stirred inside her, something older than fear, compassion that bordered on rebellion. Then take me instead, she said. Both stared at her, the divine and the beast, as if the universe had stuttered. You would offer your mortal breath for his curse. Ask the god. I offer with his, she said. Let him live through me. Let me bear what he cannot. Fenrin's eyes widened, voice breaking. You don't know what you're asking. My soul is ice and grief. It will freeze your heart. Then melt, she whispered. Or let me freeze beside you. Either way, we'll end the waiting. The god's hand lowered slightly. A pact between mortal and relic? It cannot last. Your soul will unravel. Lyra took a single step forward, her shadow stretching until it touched Fenrin's paw. Maybe that's what the stars need, someone willing to unravel. The air convulsed. Light coiled around them like a serpent, biting its own tail. The god's gaze deepened, ancient and weary. If this is a path you claim, then it must be sealed by truth. He extended both hands, one toward Fenrin, one toward Lyra. Between them, a sphere of light formed, pulsing like a heartbeat, golden at first, then turning silver, then white so pure it became translucent. Share your breath, he said, and know that in doing so, neither of you will belong wholly to yourselves again. Lyra nodded. Fenrin hesitated, then bent low until his muzzle touched her chest, feeling the rhythm beneath her ribs. She exhaled, he inhaled. The moment their breaths met, the world ruptured. A shock wave spread outward. Frost cracking, cloud shattering, rivers waking. The god stepped back, shielding his eyes. Threads of light and shadow intertwined around Lyra and Fenrin, fusing, twisting, merging. Her hair lifted as though underwater, her skin etched with runes that pulsed in time with Fenrin's heartbeat. His eyes flared gold. His muzzle shimmered into form, and for the first time since creation forgot his kind, the wolf spoke with a human voice. Lyra, he whispered, the word trembling like snow at dawn. She gasped, her lungs burned, yet her limbs felt weightless. Fenrin, the god, lowered his hands. The air hummed with new equilibrium. It is done, he said, two souls bound in one breath. The wolf has been given speech. The mortal, strength beyond flesh. But your bond will come at a price. When one ceases, both will fade. When one lies, both will suffer. We accept, Lyra said, though her voice sounded half as now. Half hers. Fenrin turned toward the god. Then spare her world. Spare the sky until we return with truth. The god's light dimmed to a faint shimmer. If you find where the sky was hidden, perhaps even the gods will remember how to mourn. He began to fade, dissolving into gold dust that fell like slow snow. His final words lingered. Seek the heart beneath the heart, where sorrow became the seat of heaven. And then he was gone. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was alive. Lyra collapsed to her knees, panting. Her breath came out in visible ribbons, glowing faintly before fading. Fenrin stood beside her, eyes full of wonder and fear. He flexed his claws. They shimmered faintly, half material, half light. "You should not have done that," he said, but his tone held gratitude more than scolding. "You should have let me decide," she replied, smiling weakly. "I'm still a shepherd's daughter. I make pacts with the lost." He lowered his head. "And what is the mortal gain from binding herself to a beast cursed by gods?" "Someone who listens," she said. "Someone who doesn't look away." Fenrin almost smiled. "If wolves could, then let's find your sky." "Our sky," she corrected softly. They began walking north again, though the world had changed. The air no longer burned with frost. Instead, it shimmered faintly with color. The snow beneath their feet glowed where they stepped, marking a path that faded behind them like a memory too gentle to last. The wind that once wept now sang, a melody uncertain but hopeful. As they moved, Fenrin tested his voice, awkward at first, then steady, carrying the resonance of mountains. He spoke of the goddess who wept stars, of the places where light hid itself in stone, of temples drowned under auroras. Lyra listened, sometimes answering aloud, sometimes through thought alone. Their minds had become mirrors, reflecting each other's fears, shaping each other's courage. Each mile they walked, they learned something of balance. When Lyra grew tired, Fenrin's strength lifted her. When Fenrin's spirit faltered, her heartbeat steadied his steps. They were halves of a single vow, walking through twilight that no longer seemed endless. Yet even as peace brushed their journey, shadows stirred beyond sight. For what god spares life without expecting its echo? One night, as they camped beneath a sky that flickered like a wounded flame, Lyra whispered, "Do you think the god will keep his word?" Fenrin looked up. "Gods keep nothing, but oaths have weight, even to them. He gave us time. That is mercy enough. And if we fail?" He turned to her, eyes soft, almost human. "Then let the world remember that once a mortal shared her breath with a wolf to keep the heavens alive." Lyra smiled faintly. "That's not failure. That's legend." He inclined his head. "Then let's make it one worth the telling." They rose as the wind shifted, carrying, faint and distant, the echo of stars waking. Together they walked toward the unseen horizon, toward the heart beneath the heart, toward the secret place where the sky had been hidden. And as they moved, the night, for the first time in an age, began to pale. The farther north they walked, the less the world obeyed. Hills bent inward as if retreating from themselves. Rivers ran upward into mist. The stars above, those few still brave enough to burn, moved in patterns that defied reason. Lyra had stopped trying to mark days. Time, in these reaches, had grown tired of being measured. Fenrin's paws left no tracks now. Each step seemed to erase itself, as though even the earth was uncertain he belonged to it. The bond between them pulsed softly in her chest, a steady rhythm that beat in time with his own. When she slept, she dreamed in his voice. When he breathed, she heard her own thoughts echoing back through him. They had become one motion divided between two bodies. The wind had grown thin, so thin that sound could barely pass through it. And yet, from somewhere ahead, a hum began to rise. Faint, steady, endless. It wasn't a melody nor language, but something older, like the vibration of light remembering it once was flame. Fenrin stopped at the crest of a ridge that overlooked nothing. Below them stretched an emptiness that shimmered faintly, not with light, but with echo. The horizon fell away into a silver blur. There, at the center of it all, was a mouth in the earth, a vast cavern rimmed with frost that glowed as if it were made of captured dawn. Lyra exhaled. "Is that—" "The edge of time," Fenrin said. His voice sounded heavier than it ever had. "Where endings go to wait." They descended. The air thickened as they approached, pressing against their lungs. Lyra's breath became visible, not as mist, but as motes of light that drifted upward and vanished. The closer they came, the more her thoughts slowed, as though each one had to push through centuries before it reached her tongue. Fenrin walked ahead silent, though she could feel unease bleeding through their bond. "What lies inside?" she asked. He hesitated. "Echoes of everything that was extinguished. Stars, and more than stars. Voices, faces, moments that could not bear to die." The cave yawned before them, swallowing all sound. The hum grew louder, deeper, no longer outside but within them. Lyra reached out, fingertips brushing the entrance. Frost clung to her skin and burned. Not cold but hot, searing memory into flesh. She gasped. Visions flared behind her eyes. 1,000 sunsets collapsing, 1,000 candles going dark, each whispering a name she didn't know. Fenrin nudged her gently. "Once we step through, we will not return unchanged." "Then let's not return unchanged," she said, and crossed the threshold. The world dissolved. The cave was not stone but reflection. Every surface shimmered like frozen water. Their own forms multiplied in endless recursion, wolf and woman, light and shadow, walking through mirrors that breathed. Each step echoed backward and forward in time, as if they were walking through all their past and future simultaneously. Fenrin's reflection lagged behind. Then another appeared. Then a third. Lyra stopped. "Do you see that?" He turned and his heart clenched. The reflections were not reflections at all. Each was him, but not quite. One wore scars he did not carry. Another's fur was darker, its eyes cold. A third limped, its muzzle streaked with blood. All stared back at him, silent, their movements slightly delayed, as though they remembered being him but had lived differently. Lyra reached for him, but he stood frozen. "What are they?" "My selves," he whispered. "The ones I never became." The nearest reflection stepped forward, muzzle twitching. Its voice was his own, but deeper, fractured by grief. "You chased dawns that weren't yours. You howl for gods who never listened. You think you hunt the sky, but it is the sky that hunts you." Fenrin bared his teeth. "You're ghosts of choices. Nothing more." "Then why do we hurt?" The reflection growled. "Why do we remember the pain you refuse to feel?" Lyra stepped closer, her own reflection wavering strangely. "They're echoes. You said everything extinguished comes here." "Yes," Fenrin said, "but I didn't know echoes could cues." The cave pulsed. Light bled from the walls, filling the air with faces, countless, fleeting, luminous. Some were human, some divine, some unrecognizable. They floated past like thoughts, whispering fragments of memory. Lyra brushed one with her fingertips and gasped. The vision flared into being, a god kneeling before his own reflection, shattering it with a scream. The image collapsed, leaving a single phrase echoing in her skull. "We fear mirrors because they remember what we hide." She stumbled back, shaking. Fenrin caught her with a paw that shimmered faintly, half-light. "What did you see?" "The gods," she whispered. "They don't fear mortals. They fear mirrors." "Why?" "Because mirrors don't pray. They only tell truth." As she spoke, the reflections began to shift. The walls of the cave brightened, revealing carvings beneath the frost. Endless spirals leading inward, each inscribed with a single glyph. Fenrin recognized some ancient names of gods long unspoken. At the center was a symbol he didn't know. Two shapes intertwined, one of flame, one of shadow. Lyra traced it with her hand, and the hum stopped. Silence fell so completely it rang. Then the cave breathed. The frost peeled from the walls like shedding skin. Beneath it, veins of light pulsed, winding deeper into the dark. The reflections of Fenrin's other self began to fade. Save for one, the smallest, a pup made of starlight and snow. It looked up at him with eyes that held no accusation, only innocence. Lyra knelt. "That one, it isn't angry." Fenrin's voice trembled. "It's the first breath I ever took, before I knew loneliness." The pup stepped forward and pressed his forehead against his. For a heartbeat, both wolf and echo glowed the same silver hue. When the light faded, the pup was gone, but warmth lingered. Lyra smiled faintly. Even echoes can forgive. Fenrin looked toward the depths. "Then maybe gods can too." "Do they deserve to?" "Not all," he said. "But some truths must still be found." They moved deeper, following the veins of light until they reached the heart of the cave, a chamber so vast it seemed to contain the night itself. In its center floated a sphere of darkness, pulsing gently. It was not absence, but memory condensed. Every light that had ever died, every flame snuffed, every star swallowed by forgetting. Lyra felt tears on her cheeks, though she didn't remember crying. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the sky," Fenrin said softly. "All of it, hidden inside its own shadow." He stepped closer, but the air thickened, resisting him. The darkness recognized him and stirred. From its surface rose shapes, stars rekindling for moments before sinking again. Voices spoke, layered and endless. "You hunt what cannot be hunted. You chase what already chose to end. Why disturb our rest?" Lyra stepped forward beside him. "Because the world still needs you. The world forgets. That is mercy." "No," she said, her voice steady. "That's surrender." Her words rippled to the chamber like stones through water. The sphere flickered, uncertain. Fenrin bared his teeth, eyes burning. "She speaks truth. The world may forget, but we remember. We are the mirror you fear." The sphere trembled. Cracks of light spidered across its surface. For an instant, the chamber filled with warmth, 1,000 suns trying to rise at once. Then the light folded inward again, retreating. "They're resisting," Lyra gasped. "They don't trust us." "Then we'll give them reason to," Fenrin said. "We'll bring them grief, and through grief, dawn." The cave began to collapse. Shards of reflection rained around them like broken glass. Through each shard, Lyra saw scenes from other worlds, oceans that glowed, forests made of stars, creatures who remembered names the gods had lost. The wind howled through time itself. Fenrin grabbed her hand, and together they ran toward the fading light at the far end of the chamber. Behind them, the sphere pulsed one last time, releasing a single fragment, a shard of condensed light no larger than a heartbeat. It struck the ground and rolled toward Lyra's feet. She bent, lifted it, and felt its weightless warmth seep into her palm. Inside it shimmered a reflection. Her face, and behind it, Fenrin's, merged into one. She looked up at him. "What is it?" "The first star willing to trust again," he said. "Hold it close. It will show the way." They stepped through the final mirror as the cave sealed behind them, vanishing into silence. When they emerged, the world had changed. The twilight sky above pulsed faintly, as if stirred by their passage. The constellations whispered, not in pain, but in wonder. Lyra held the shard high. Its light spilled outward, tracing invisible paths through the heavens. Fenrin stood beside her, eyes gleaming with something that looked almost like hope. "The edge of time," she said softly, "and we're still here." "For now," Fenrin replied. "But the gods will feel what we've awoken. Let them," Lyra said. Maybe it's time they saw their reflection. Together, they walked into the new light, wolf and woman, bound by breath and memory, carrying a fragment of every star the universe thought it had lost. Beyond the cave, the world no longer followed law or lineage. The horizon had turned liquid, bending like glass under invisible tides. Each step was both descent and ascent. The stars above shimmered faintly, hesitant to return to their ancient constellations. Lyra and Fenrin walked beneath their flicker, the shard of light she carried pulsing gently between her palms. They had reached the threshold where the living met what once lived. And there, cutting across the plain like a wound of silver, flowed the river Orvain, the sacred river of forgetting. It ran backward through time, swallowing every name whispered into its mist. The surface looked calm, but beneath it drifted echoes, half-formed faces, voices that sang without words, and faint gleams that could have been souls or memories. It was said the gods themselves had carved it to separate mortality from eternity. Nothing crossed it twice. Fenrin stopped at the bank. His reflection trembled, split, and faded. "This is it," he said. "The border. Beyond it lies the realm of vanished stars." Lyra knelt, touching the water. It was warm, but it carried sorrow deep enough to cut through bone. She felt thousands of names beneath her fingertips. Forgotten names, abandoned prayers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and it's dying. All beauty dies," Fenrin said. "That's why it endures." The river's current moved toward the void, unending, unstoppable. To cross it was to defy the very shape of time. Yet they had no choice. The path to the hidden sky lay beyond. The shard of starlight in Lyra's hand dimmed as though uncertain, flickering like a heartbeat caught between worlds. "How do we reverse a river?" she asked. Fenrin looked across the water, his gaze distant. "By remembering every name it erased." They stood at the edge for a long while. The air smelled of salt and ash. Then Lyra began to hum. Softly at first, a single note carried by trembling breath. The sound rippled across the surface, bending the current for a heartbeat before fading. She closed her eyes and tried again, reaching deeper into the silence within her where the constellations once cried. The melody grew, wordless but heavy with longing. The river listened. Then, from its depths, voices began to rise, faint, sorrowful, layered atop hers. They were the names of the forgotten, the syllables of those who had drowned in memory. They filled the air like snow that glowed from within. The current slowed. Ripples reversed. The river began to hesitate. Fenrin stepped forward, his reflection multiplied behind him in the rippling mirror. "Keep singing," he said. "It remembers you." The song changed. Now the wind carried it, echoing from mountain to mountain, each note weaving to the stars like a thread repairing heaven's torn veil. The river fought against itself, swirling in confusion, its voice and hers entwined. Then Fenrin did what no god nor beast had dared. He bent his head and drank. The first mouthful burned like lightning. The water was not liquid, but memory liquefied. Every sorrow, every fading light, every unspoken goodbye, it flooded his throat, searing down into the roots of his being. His eyes blazed white, then black, then all colors at once. The bond between him and Lyra shuddered. She gasped, her song breaking, feeling his pain as her own. "Fenrin!" she cried. "Stop!" He shook his head, muzzle dripping silver fire. "It must know me to let us through." He drank again. This time the river answered. The surface rose like breath. Waves folded upward instead of outward, forming spirals that spun against time. The flow reversed. Water climbed into sky, forming rings around him, each glowing faintly with imprisoned light. Within those rings drifted stars, not reflections, but real ones, freed from drowning. The river had begun to flow backward. Lyra fell to her knees, still singing but now through tears. The melody had become prayer, then plea, then surrender. Her voice no longer carried words, only intention. She sang for the dead and the unborn, for the sky and the soil, for the wolf who carried eternity in his throat. The current surrounded Fenrin now, rising like a crown. Then silence. The river froze mid-motion. Fenrin stood at the center, unmoving. Water coiled around him like ribbons of glass. His fur glowed from within, threads of silver winding through it. And when he opened his eyes, they mirrored the river itself, endless, restless, full of light that had forgotten how to shine. Lyra reached for him, but a wall of invisible force stopped her. She could feel his heartbeat through the air, deep and slow, merging with the rhythm of the river. He turned toward her, or rather, something inside him did. His voice was not his anymore. It was layered, countless, vast. The river dreams. "What do you mean?" she asked, trembling. "It has no body, so it uses mine," he said. "Every light it swallowed, every life it forgot, they're awake now. Inside me," his body flickered, translucent, as if his form could no longer decide what shape to keep. The river's current began to pulse in time with his heartbeat, spreading outward through the landscape. The reverse flow carved new paths through the air itself, streams of light bending upward toward the heavens. Lyra stepped closer, pressing her palm against the invisible barrier. "Fenrin, listen to me. You're not the river." He smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant. "Aren't I? You shared your breath once. Now I share their memory." The reverse current began to rise higher, arching over them in a colossal arc. Inside it shimmered scenes from before the world began. The birth of first dawn, the shattering of the moon, the first lie told by a god. Lyra saw them all reflected in the flood, and among them herself, older, standing beneath a sky reborn. "Fenrin," she whispered, "they're showing us everything." "No," he murmured. They're showing me what they dream. What do rivers dream of? Of what they carry. The river surged again. Lyra stumbled back as its edge crept toward her feet. The light within it pulsed, forming shapes, hands, wings, faces, reaching for her as if begging to be remembered. She wanted to reach back, but the force pressed against her chest, holding her still. The shard of starlight she carried began to burn. Through their bond, she felt Fenrin's turmoil, joy and agony intertwined. He was drowning in memory too vast to hold, and yet it felt right, necessary, sacred. "You can't contain it," she cried. "Let it flow through." He roared, a sound that split the air and the concept of silence. The river responded, bursting upward into a spiral column that climbed toward the sky. Water turned to light, light to sound, sound to thought. Within that spiral, she glimpsed a vanished constellation stirring, waking, stretching through the void. The river had become a ladder to the lost sky. Lyra ran forward, breaking through the barrier as it dissolved into mist. She reached Fenrin's side, grabbing his fur. It was cold, slick with light. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I am here," he said, though his voice echoed as if spoken from beyond mountains. "Then lead me across." He lowered his head, and she climbed onto his back. The river, his river, rose beneath them, lifting both like a tide. Together they ascended along the current, the world shrinking below until ground became nothing but reflection. Every droplet they passed contained an image, a face, a moment, a lost dawn, all carried upward in the flow. Lyra felt the pulse of the shard against her chest. Its light synchronized with Fenrin's heartbeat, guiding the river higher still. Around them, the air thinned, turning translucent. They were leaving the mortal world. Below, the reverse current still shimmered, holding the echo of their passage. Above, darkness waited, not absence, but potential, the realm of vanished stars. As they crossed the final threshold, the river hesitated, trembling, unsure whether to continue or collapse. "Hold it together," Lyra whispered, clutching Fenrin's mane. "You can do this." He turned his head slightly. "It's not me holding it now. It's them." "Who?" "The lights. The ones we woke." The current flared once, twice, then steadied. The river flowed upward into eternity, carrying them with it. But in that ascension, Lyra felt something shift, a subtle fracture within their bond. Fenrin's heartbeat grew fainter, slower, as though part of him was drifting elsewhere. "Fenrin," she called. He didn't answer. His eyes were open, glowing softly, but his mind was far away. At last, the current reached its end, a vast stillness suspended between worlds. Before them stretched a sea of darkness, studded with fragments of dying light. It was beautiful and infinite. Lyra slid from his back, landing softly on a surface that wasn't water or air, but both. She turned to him, the wolf who carried a river inside. "Fenrin," she said gently, "wake up." He lifted his head slowly. His voice was faint, echoing with countless tones. "The river dreams through me now, and I dream through it." "What is a dream?" He looked up, and the stars flickered in answer. "It dreams of home." Lyra took his face in her hands, the starlight reflecting in her eyes. "Then let's find it." The reverse river began to descend, carrying light back into the heavens it had once abandoned. For the first time since memory began, the constellations wept, not in sorrow, but in recognition. And somewhere deep within Fenrin's chest, where the current whispered eternally, the river murmured a single word to itself: "Remember." The river's dream carried them northward, until dawn no longer knew how to end. Lyra awoke to the shimmer of strange light spilling across endless rooftops, copper and bone, stacked like memories on the side of a frozen sea. Fenrin stood beside her on the ridge, for gleaming faintly with what still lived of starlight. The air below pulsed with quiet. No markets, no bells, not even footsteps. Only silence, thick as incense. "Is this the realm of the vanished?" she asked. Fenrin's ears twitched. "No, this is worse. Mortals still breathe here." Before them stretched Solvik, the city that prayed to nothing. Its spires pierced clouds that never moved. Great banners hung from every tower, each embroidered with a single black line, the symbol of absence. People moved like shadows through streets paved with mirrored stone, their faces half covered by veils. When they spoke, no sound came. Each word was traded, bought, or stolen, for in Salvik, memory was currency. Lyra could feel before they entered, the hum of thought being exchanged, weighed, and silenced. Her own memories stirred uneasily, as if ready to be haggled over. "Stay close," Fenrin murmured. "Here, forgetting is holy." They descended into the city. A procession of merchants passed them, dragging carts filled with glass jars. Inside, each floated a faint light, memories distilled into liquid form. The merchants' mouths were sealed with wax, their eyes hollow from the trade. At the square center stood a towering obelisk of obsidian carved with names that shimmered briefly, then disappeared, replaced by others. A sign above the obelisk read, "Speak and you pay." Lyra whispered, "What kind of worship is this?" Fenrin's voice was low. "The kind gods love best, the one that keeps mortals quiet." They walked through the market, surrounded by silence so complete it hurt. Every sound they made, every footstep, every heartbeat, drew stares. People shrank back, terrified. Some even dropped to their knees, clutching their ears as though the faint rhythm of living flesh were blasphemy. At last a woman approached, her eyes pale, her voice trembling as she mouthed words without sound. When she touched Lyra's wrist, meaning bloomed in her mind. "You're allowed," the thought said. "Be careful. The temple will hear you." Lyra gently pulled her hand away. "Let them." At the city's heart rose the temple of still tongues, vast, faceless, carved from white stone that swallowed light. No doors, only a single archway draped in frost. Inside, candles burned without flame, casting shadows that didn't move. At the center stood a throne made of mirrors turned inward. Upon it sat a god. He was not like the one they had met before. This god was small, human-shaped, fragile, with skin that looked carved from salt. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth was stitched shut with silver thread. Around him, priests knelt in endless prayer, heads bowed, ears bound in cloth. The god raised a hand, and the air around Fenrin and Lyra compressed into silence, so deep it strangled thought itself. "Bow!" said the voice inside their skulls. Not sound, but command. Fenrin's fur bristled. "You would silence even thought?" "Silence is purity," the god answered. "The world's noise killed the heavens. Here we keep them clean." Lyra stepped forward. "You sell memories like coins." "Words are dangerous," said the god. "Memories are weapons. We cleanse them for peace." Fenrin snarled. "You don't cleanse them. You hoard them." The priest gasped, though no sound escaped their lips. The god rose from his throne, anger flashing like heat without flame. "Beast of frost, you dare accuse divinity?" "I dare remind it," Fenrin growled. The god descended barefoot, radiating absence. Each step unmade a note of the world. Birds ceased to exist, wind forgot its path. He reached Fenrin and placed a hand on the wolf's head, forcing his gaze downward. "Bow!" he said again. All things end in quiet. Fenrin met his stare. Once, perhaps. The god's grip tightened. "You speak of defiance? I speak of memory." He opened his mouth, and laughter spilled out. Not mockery, not rage. Laughter, pure, sudden, alive. It was small at first, rough from disuse, but it grew, rolling to the temple like thunder breaking ice. The mirrors trembled. The candles flickered. The priests clutched their chests, uncertain whether to flee or cry. No one had laughed in Salvik for 1,000 years. The god recoiled, hand shaking. "What is this sound?" "It's the one thing silence cannot erase," said Fenrin. "Joy without permission." He kept laughing, the deep, resonant kind that carried warmth into stone. The god stumbled backward, disoriented, as if struck by a memory too bright to bear. The silver threads over his mouth began to fray. One snapped, then another. Lyra watched, transfixed. The air that had been suffocating began to move again. Dust lifted. Bells somewhere far below the city rang once, startled into existence. A child's forgotten voice whispered in the wind. The market outside stirred, faint murmurs, hesitant but real. The silence cracked like thin ice under sunlight. The god fell to his knees. It wasn't defeat, it was awakening. He bowed his head before Fenrin, not in submission, but in remembrance. Tears of salt streaked his face as he whispered through torn stitches, his first true words in an age. I remember laughter. Lyra stepped forward, kneeling beside him. Then remember everything else too. The god looked at her. A mortal with a star in her chest, light glimmering faintly through her skin. We built this city to protect the world from its own voice, he said. But silence became our god, not our gift. Silence isn't evil, she said gently. Only one forgets music. Fenrin helped him rise. The priests watched in awe as their master's glow dimmed into something human, fragile, humbled. Your city can still heal, Fenrin told him, but it must learn to speak again. The god nodded, trembling. How? Start small, Lyra said. Start with names. She turned to a crowd that had gathered beyond the temple doors. Merchants, children, veiled mothers. Speak your names, she cried. At first, nothing. Fear held their throats like chains. Then one voice, small, hoarse, broke the stillness. Eris. Then another, Tova. Then dozens, hundreds. The air filled with names, each one glowing faintly as it left its owner's lips. Every syllable rose like a spark, gathering above the obelisk in the square. The banner of silence tore itself free, fluttering down in defeat. Light returned to the eyes of the people. Laughter, tentative, awkward, rippled through the streets. And in the temple, the god wept openly. Fenrin looked to Lyra. It begins. She nodded, the first kneeling. When night came, Salvik shimmered like a city reborn. The priests lit fires in their courtyards and spoke aloud to one another for the first time, their voices breaking from lack of use but filled with wonder. Children ran through the square, chasing echoes they had never known existed. The obelisk melted into water, revealing beneath it a hidden pool that reflected the stars above. Stars that had begun to return. Lyra sat beside Fenrin, on the temple steps. The god of silence knelt nearby, not as ruler but as companion. His voice faint but warm as he hummed a forgotten tune. You didn't need to fight him, she said. Fenrin's eyes glowed softly. Laughter fights for itself. He will remember this, she murmured. So will they. Let them. The age of arrogance has waited long enough for its first kneeling. They watched as the waters of the city's new pool caught the light of a star, one that had not been seen since the world began forgetting. It flickered once, twice, then steadied, anchoring itself in the night. Lyra smiled. The sky is listening again. And laughing, Fenrin said. The god beside them bowed his head, whispering the final prayer of the day, not in silence, but in gratitude. The laughter of mortals echoed across the frozen sea, rippling the stars above. For the first time in an age, the heavens did not answer with thunder or flame, but with a sound neither god nor mortal had heard in millennia. The sound of the sky exhaling. The road from Salvik wound north through a forest that no longer remembered being alive. Every tree was pale as bone, their branches twisted into shapes that reached and pleaded toward a sun that never came. Between their roots flowed thin streams of starlight, remnants of the river Fenrin still carried within him. Each droplet shimmered when Lyra passed, drawn to the shard of light beating faintly against her chest. For days they followed a path that seemed to choose itself. Sometimes it disappeared entirely, dissolving beneath frost that sang when stepped upon. Sometimes it split into two, both leading to the same horizon. Fenrin said nothing of direction. He moved as if guided by scent alone, though there was no wind. Lyra trusted the silence between their breaths more than any compass. At last they came to a clearing so vast the air itself seemed to hesitate before entering. There in its center lay Yggdrasil's youngest root, a colossal spiral petrified wood half buried in crystal soil. It pulsed faintly like the heartbeat of a mountain. Though motionless, the root dreamed. The ground around it hummed softly, each vibration a fragment of its sleeping thought. Lyra approached with reverence. Is it alive? Fenrin nodded. Barely. It dreams the dreams that feed the rest of the tree. When it stops dreaming, the stars forget their way home. She laid her hand upon the root. Warmth seeped into her skin, not the warmth of flame, but of memory trying to wake. A voice stirred inside her skull, distant and melodic, neither male nor female, but old as germination itself. Who treads upon the breath of the roots? Lyra bowed her head. A mortal, carrying the sky's shard, and a beast who carries a river that reversed. The voice murmured, two fragments of what the world once was. Speak your purpose before the soil dreams you too. Fenrin stepped forward. We seek counsel. The heavens are stirring. We've freed a light that wishes to return, but we do not yet understand the cost. The ground quivered. Cracks of luminescence opened along the root's bark, like eyes blinking awake. The voice deepened, heavy with sorrow. The cost is always the same, balance. The sky left not out of wrath, but mercy. Lyra frowned. Mercy? The world is dying without it. Dying slowly is kinder than burning quickly. A silence fell, vast and deliberate. Even the air seemed afraid to disturb it. Lyra glanced at Fenrin. His eyes reflected the faint gold of the awakening root. Explain, he said. Long ago, when the sky still sang, its song grew too bright. The gods built light faster than hearts could bear it. The world began to see too much. Every secret, every sorrow, every wound. Mortals tore themselves apart under truth they could not unsee. The voice became softer, almost tender. So the sky was hidden, folded behind shadow. Night became the salve for vision. In darkness, hearts learned to imagine instead of witness. That is how you survived. Lyra's breath caught. Then, if we bring it back, it will burn the world blind. The root finished. Dreams will die first, then mercy. There will be no night left to heal you. They stood in stunned quiet. Fenrin paced slowly, his paws pressing shallow impressions into the glowing soil. You speak, as if ignorance were salvation, he said. But without dawn, what are we? Cattle grazing in the dark. The root's laughter was like rain falling upward. You misunderstand. Darkness is not blindness. It is choice. Choice. Yes, the choice to see or not to imagine or to accept. When all is light, there is no choice. You are naked to every truth, every fear. Even gods cannot bear such exposure. That is why they sleep beneath their own stars now. Lyra's voice trembled. Then why did the stars call for help? Why did they weep in the wind? The earth sighed through her feet. Because even mercy tires of being misunderstood. Fenrin looked to the horizon. He could still hear the faint murmur of the reversed river flow within him. The countless voices of forgotten lights whispering dreams into his blood. Each syllable was a reminder of what they had lost, but now those whispers turned uneasy, uncertain, as if the river itself had begun to doubt the path it carved. He turned back to the root. You call the sky mercy, but I saw what its absence did. The gods became arrogant. Mortals became hollow. What is mercy if it starved the world? The root pulsed brighter. Would you rather a feast that kills? Fenrin growled, frustration cutting through awe. Perhaps the world needs a burn, if only to feel alive again. Lyra flinched. Fenrin, he met her gaze. We fought to bring back what was lost, but what if the gods weren't thieves? What if they were healers? Then what are we? She asked. Maybe the infection, he said softly. The root stirred. Every healer risks becoming a wound. Every wound, a teacher. Lyra's eyes filled with reflection. Then tell us, teacher, what do we do? The voice within was slowed, deepened, each word resonating through marrow. You cannot stop what stirs above. The sky awakens, drawn to its echo within you both. But you can temper it. Carry its light not as weapon, but as burden. Guide it gently. Do not command it. And when the heavens open again, remind them why darkness was made. The bark cracked further, shedding slivers of golden sap that evaporated into sparks. The root's hum faltered, its dream thinning toward silence. Before it fully stilled, the voice spoke one last time. The first light will not love you. It will test you. It will seek to see itself reflected. And when it does, Pray that you are ready to look back. Then the glow faded. The forest dimmed to gray. Lyra exhaled shakily. It's dying again. No, Fenrir said. It's sleeping deeper. He sat beside the massive root, watching how faint lines of heat still ran beneath the surface like veins of buried fire. It dreams of becoming flame, he murmured, of burning instead of breathing. Would that be its end? Or its beginning? They rested beneath its vast shadow. The silence was not heavy like Solvik's. It was patient, ancient, kind. Lyra leaned against the rough bark, feeling faint tremors of dreaming beneath her skin. Fenrir lay beside her, his eyes distant. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, if stealing the sky was really the mistake? He did not answer at once. The question settled between them like ash. I wonder if returning it would be, he said finally. We call it light, but maybe it was always hunger. Maybe the gods hid it not from cruelty but fear of being consumed by what they made. Lyra turned the shard of starlight in her hand. It pulsed faintly, reacting to his words. Then why give us the desire to find it? Because creation doesn't learn from obedience, he said. It learns from disobedience. She smiled faintly. You sound like a god. He shook his head. No, just a mistake that refuses to end quietly. The night deepened. Above them, clouds parted for a moment, revealing a single star, one of the few that had returned since the river's reversal. It flickered uncertainly, like an eye trying to open. Lyra looked up and whispered, If it burns us blind, at least we'll see it once. Fenrir's ears tilted toward the sound, and for a long while neither spoke. The roots' dream thrummed gently beneath them, shaping visions inside their half-sleep. Visions of sky descending, of oceans rising to meet it, of mortals staring upward with wonder that bled into madness. When dawn came, it was not light but warmth that woke them. Faint, fragile, yet real. The forest shimmered with pale fireflies. Each one pulsed in rhythm with the sleeping root. Fenrir rose, stretching, his breath leaving trails of silver. It dreams of flame, he murmured again. Maybe it wants to remind us that every light begins as something that consumes. Lyra stood beside him, brushing frost from her hair. Then maybe the world needs to remember how to burn, but also how to heal. He looked toward the northern horizon, where the sky trembled faintly as if waiting for them. Perhaps that's the test it spoke of, not to find the sky, but to decide if we deserve it. She nodded slowly. And if we don't? He smiled, teeth catching the faint dawn. Then at least the darkness will know we tried. Together they turned north again, their shadows stretching long over the dreaming earth. Two small shapes walking toward the horizon where light and mercy still argued over which would save the world first. And beneath them, the youngest root of Yggdrasil sighed in its sleep, dreaming of the day it would wake as fire, and wondering, perhaps, if even flames could learn restraint. The road from Yggdrasil's youngest root led westward, through valleys of green fire and mountains that pulsed like sleeping hearts. There were no maps here, no roads drawn by mortal hand. Only the pull of purpose, the invisible line that tied them to what still needed mending. The shard of starlight around Lyra's neck had begun to change. It no longer glowed steadily, but beat in rhythm with her heart, as if learning her pulse. Fenrir walked beside her in silence. His fur had dimmed since the encounter with the dreaming root, streaked now with faint lines of gold that flickered when he breathed. The river that lived inside him murmured more often, restless, speaking of fire and reflection, of paths made of mirrors and songs made of molten stone. He listened, and sometimes he answered, but Lyra could not tell which voice belonged to him anymore. It was a hammer that found them first. A single, clear strike rolled across the mountains, echoing with purpose, not the sound of war, nor of work, something between the two. Another strike followed, steady as a heartbeat, and another. The rhythm drew them onward through a canyon of obsidian, until they reached a valley that shimmered as if made of glass. There, half buried in a ring of basalt pillars, stood a forge, older than empires, older even than gods. Its anvil was carved from the skull of a titan, its flames the color of dawn seen through tears. And at its center worked a woman. She was mortal, or something near it. Her skin bore the gray tint of ash long cooled. Her hair glimmered like strands of molten silver, falling to her waist. She hammered metal that did not exist in any world Lyra knew, ribbons of light and darkness braided together. When she struck, sparks flew upward and became small birds of fire that vanished into the air, leaving behind faint songs. She looked up as they approached, and her eyes shone like steel still cooling. "You took your time," she said, voice carrying the tone of one who has waited through centuries. Fenrin bristled. "You know us." "I know why you're here," she replied. "The sky's breath has reached even this place. The roots whispered your names in the iron." Lyra stepped closer, the heat pressing against her skin like memory, trying to return. "Who are you?" "I am a Slog," she said simply. Smith of what the gods forgot to finish. A Slog gestured to the anvil. Upon it lay fragments of divine tools, a broken crown, a shattered mirror, a blade dulled by time. "They come to me when they remember they were once creators," she said, her hammer striking softly now. "But creation without sorrow is vanity, so I temper their works with grief." Lyra watched as the Slog lifted a strip of molten light with tongs, twisted it once, and plunged it into a basin of tears. Steam rose, shaped like hands reaching for forgiveness. "You forge with tears? With what else?" A Slog smiled faintly. "Fire burns, sorrow binds. Without sorrow, light forgets what it means to comfort." Fenrin circled the forge, eyes reflecting its flame. "We were told that if the sky returns too soon, it will burn the world blind." The smith nodded. "It will, unless it learns humility." "Can you teach it?" Lyra asked. A Slog's gaze softened. "No, but I can teach you." For 7 days and 7 nights, the forge sang. A Slog taught Lyra to shape light not as metal, but as memory, to hold it until it trembled, then fold it with sorrow until it became malleable. The shards of lost starlight she carried melted under her touch, fusing with her tears. Each swing of the hammer echoed through the valley, sending ripples across the heavens. "Do not strike to dominate," a Slog said. "Strike to understand." When Lyra faltered, the smith's voice guided her like a prayer. "Sorrow is not weakness. It's proof that something once mattered. Use that." And Lyra did. With every blow, she saw her past shimmer in the flame. Her mother's silence, the faces of those who had forgotten her, the ghosts she had followed. She fed them all into the forge. What emerged was no weapon, but a filament of soft light, pliant and strong, humming with quiet purpose. A Slog smiled. "You've learned to make the impossible, warm from pain. Now it will listen to you." Lyra cradled the glowing thread in her hands. "What do I make of it?" "Whatever the world needs most," the smith said. "Perhaps a bridge, perhaps a veil, perhaps nothing at all." While Lyra learned to forge light, Fenrir stood at the forge's edge, watching the flames bend around him. He had never trusted fire. It belonged to gods, not wolves. Yet this flame was different. It recognized him. It whispered in a voice like running water. "You carry truth inside you. Why hide it behind teeth?" He looked down at his reflection in the molten basin. His fangs, sharp as prophecy, gleamed faintly. In them, he saw every life he had taken before the dawn fled, the beasts, the men, the dreams. They shone like runes unspoken. A Slog came to stand beside him. "You want to change," she said, not as question but fact. "I want to speak without wounding," he murmured. "Then forge your fangs anew. Let them write instead of bite." She handed him a chisel forged from his own shadow. Fenrir took it between his teeth, bit down hard, and the pain was bright as revelation. One by one, he drew each fang out, glowing and weightless, and laid them upon the anvil. The sound they made was not a bone but a bell's, deep, resonant, endless. A Slog guided him through the work. They heated the fangs in the sorrow fire until they softened into light, then hammered them flat, etching ancient runes across their surface. When the final stroke fell, the runes shimmered like constellations rearranged. "These are your words now," a Slog said. "Each carries a truth the world has forgotten." "What will I do with them?" he asked. "Carve," she said simply. "Not death into flesh, but truth into being." So he did. Fenrin pressed the first rune against the ground. Light sank into the soil, spreading like veins through the valley. The trees shuddered, and for the first time in an age, leaves sprouted, silver on one side, green on the other. They whispered in gratitude. The next rune he carved into the sky. Clouds parted, forming symbols that glowed faintly before dissolving into wind. When he turned back, a slog was watching with quiet pride. Truth doesn't need to be shouted, she said. Sometimes it only needs to be written where the world can feel it. Lyra stood beside Fenrin, holding her filament of sorrow light. Together, they watched as the runes faded into the distance, leaving a faint hum behind. The pulse of a world remembering its voice. By the 8th night, the forge had changed. It no longer devoured wood or coal, only meaning. Every strike of the hammer sang with purpose. Pilgrims began to arrive, mortals drawn by dreams they didn't understand. They brought broken things, mirrors, words, bones, promises. A slog welcomed them all and taught them what she had taught Lyra. The gods built temples to be worshipped, she told them. But the forge is a temple that works. It mends what holiness breaks. And so it became known. The forge of sorrow and light, the place where even gods sent their regrets to be reforged. When a slog finally placed her hammer down, she looked to Lyra and Fenrin. My task ends here, she said. Yours begins again. The sky will soon seek its own reflection. You must decide what to show it. Lyra bowed her head. And you? What will you do? The smith smiled faintly. Wait for the next fool who mistakes creation for conquest. As dawn bled through the mountains, Lyra turned to Fenrin. She taught us to make light gentle. And truth kind, he replied. They stood before the dying fire. Fenrin pressed his muzzle against the anvil, and one last rune carved itself into the metal. Memory is mercy. The flames rose high, not in hunger but in benediction, and the forge glowed brighter than the morning sky. Around it, the pilgrims knelt, whispering their own names not in fear, but in gratitude. Lyra smiled. The forge has become the new temple. Fenrin nodded, and we its wandering prayer. They turned north once more, past the echoing mountains, past the trees reborn by truth, carrying with them sorrow tempered into strength and light that had learned to listen. Behind them, the forge burned steadily, its smoke spelling across the horizon the one lesson neither god nor mortal had ever fully grasped. That creation was never meant to be worshipped, only remembered, reshaped, and shared. The road north curved into silence, so complete that even their footsteps forgot to echo. Mist wove through the rocks like smoke from a dying hearth. The sky hung low, bruised with gray, and every gust of wind sounded like the sigh of something that had once been divine. It was Fenrin who smelled it first, not blood, not fire, but remembrance. The air carried the taste of stone dust, faintly sweet, faintly sorrowful. We're close, he said, voice rough. The ground remembers prayers here. Lyra felt it too. The shard of starlight at her throat pulsed faster, tugging toward a hollow in the mountainside. The river within Fenrin murmured uneasily. The runes carved into his fangs glowed faintly, resonating with unseen words buried in the air. And then they saw it. The ruined temple stretched across a plateau of cracked obsidian, its pillars half collapsed, its roof open to a sky that no longer knew how to bless. Once, it must have been magnificent, carved from materials that no mortal hand could quarry, polished in mirror light that no longer existed. Now, only fragments remained, inscriptions carved into air itself, visible only when the wind passed through them. Each breeze carried letters made of dust and shimmer, dancing briefly before scattering. The names, whispered Lyra, awed. Yes, Fenrin said softly. The names of gods no one remembers. Every syllable still clings to being. They entered through an archway that led into stillness. Inside, walls bowed inward, covered in carvings that writhed faintly, not with motion, but with memory. Runes peeled from stone and drifted like fireflies, whispering their meanings before dissolving. It was beautiful and terrifying. A faint wind stirred. It was not air, but breath, ancient and thin, like the exhalation of a dream too long asleep. Lyra knelt, brushing her fingers through the dust. What happens if one of their names is spoken? Fenrin's ears flattened. Then it remembers. For a moment, it believes itself again, and belief is the first shape of life. She looked up. You mean it becomes a ghost? He nodded. A god's ghost. Hungry for memory, desperate to be worshipped even for a heartbeat. That is why these halls are forbidden to the living. Then why are we here? Because some truths won't stay buried, he said. And you have one that calls your name from the dark. They walked deeper. The further they went, the heavier the air became. Words hung thick, falling around them like snow. Some whispered blessings. Others hissed curses that had forgotten their purpose. Lyra touched the edge of one that floated by. It burned cold against her skin. It knows me, she murmured. Fenrin's voice was low. Of course. Mortals carry the dust of gods in their blood. Every name here remembers a piece of someone alive. Her fingers trembled. Then, if I spoke my mother's name here. He turned sharply. Don't. Why? Because memory cuts deeper than truth. She held his gaze, unyielding. I need to know who she was before she was just my mother. He hesitated. The runes along his muzzle flickered like faint stars. Then I will stay beside you when she comes. Lyra stepped into the temple's heart, a circular chamber where the ceiling had long collapsed. Above, the gray sky opened like a wound. In the center lay a basin carved of black glass, filled not with water but with drifting light. Fragments of names, endlessly circling, waiting for breath to awaken them. She knelt before it and spoke softly. Ides. The basin shuddered. The air recoiled as if struck. Light gathered, forming shapes that twisted upward. A figure rose from the basin. First a reflection, then a woman of silver dust, her face both young and ancient. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her voice was a whisper inside Lyra's bones. Who remembers me? Lyra's throat tightened. Your daughter. The figure's eyes widened. No, I left no child. You left one among mortals, Lyra said. Me. The spirit tilted her head, studying the girl as though seeing her through a veil of lifetimes. Then the curse took root deeper than I feared. What curse? The one that broke us, she said softly. The one that turned stars into silence. Fenrin bowed his head. You were part of the first constellation. Ides' gaze shifted to him. Yes, we were the pattern of dawn. 7 souls bound in love, meant to mirror the goddess's joy. But joy burns bright, and brightness hungers for itself. When mortals learned our names, they began to pray not to heaven, but to what they saw in the sky. The constellations stole worship from the gods, Lyra whispered. Ides nodded slowly. And so the gods unmade it. She spread her hands. Dust fell from her palms like light, shedding form. One by one, my brothers and sisters were torn apart. Their names were buried in stars, their bodies scattered across the firmament. I fell last, into flesh, into mortality, into your bloodline. I carried what remained of the pattern in my heart, and when I bore you, it passed to you. Lyra felt the words sink into her like blades of revelation. So that's why the stars cry when I sing. Yes, said Ides. They remember their sister's song. The spirit stepped closer, her form flickering. You were never meant to be born of one world. Your soul carries a fracture of both. That is why the sky listens to you, and why it will break for you again if you call home too soon. Lyra shook her head, tears gathering. Then what am I supposed to do with this? Am I meant to heal it or destroy it? Neither. Ides whispered. You must understand it. The sky was not stolen, child. It fled. It fled from love that turned into need. The gods wanted to be adored. The mortals wanted to belong. The stars were caught between them. Lyra felt her breath falter. And now they wait to see if love has learned restraint. The spirit's glow began to fade. The temple walls trembled, names fluttering wildly as if stirred by a storm that had no wind. Fenrin stepped forward, lowering his head. If she's part of the broken constellation, then she can restore it. Ides looked at him sadly. Perhaps, but restoration and return are not the same. The sky can be made whole, or the world can be safe. Never both. Then we choose wrong no matter what, he said quietly. Such is creation's law, she murmured. Every light must decide whether to shine or to shelter. She turned to her daughter, eyes soft now. When the time comes, remember me not as a goddess, but as a woman who wished the stars could weep and the world could laugh at once. The ghost extended her hand. Lyra reached out instinctively, and for a heartbeat they touched. Warmth surged through her, a memory not her own. She saw a sky of gold and silver threads, woven by 7 hands. She saw them laughing, shaping constellations from hope. Then came fire, betrayal, erasure. She felt the sky scream as the pattern shattered, and she heard her mother's last words before falling to earth. If ever we are remembered, let it be by someone who forgives. When Lyra opened her eyes, the spirit was gone. Only the basin remained dark and still. The air settled again, the drifting names quieting to dust. Fenrin watched her carefully. What did she leave you? Lyra stared at her palm. A single mark shimmered there, a faint 7-pointed star, its edges trembling like breath. A map, she said, or a wound. He nodded slowly. Sometimes they're the same. She looked up at the ruined ceiling, at the fragment of sky that hung motionless above them. She said the sky can't be restored without burning the world. And if you choose to restore it anyway? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. Then at least the fire will have a name. They left the temple as dusk bled into violet. Behind them, the air stirred once more, whispering through the countless names. One by one, they rose and fell like waves, gods awakening for a breath before sinking again. For the first time in an age, the old temple glowed faintly, as if grateful to be remembered. Fenrin looked back only once. Your mother was right, he said. Forgiveness is the hardest forge. Lyra touched the mark on her palm, where her mother's memory still pulsed like a heartbeat. Then let's make it strong enough to hold the sky. They walked on beneath a horizon that trembled with hidden constellations, fragments of the pattern of dawn, waiting to see if a daughter's sorrow could become the shape of mercy. Night settled like a hush over the world. Not the ordinary quiet of sleep, but the sacred stillness that comes when the universe listens. The wind had ceased its wandering. The mountains leaned inward as if holding breath, and the stars above flickered with restless anticipation. Lyra and Fenrin camped beside a lake so still that it reflected not the heavens, but the memory of them, constellations ghosting faintly across the water's surface, trying to recall their shapes. Fenrin sat at the edge, muzzle lifted, eyes bright with unease. His reflection stared back, a mirror fractured by ripples that weren't there. She's late, he murmured. Lyra, lie beside the fire, glanced up. The moon? He nodded. She doesn't like debts, but she always pays them. Before Lyra could answer, the lake trembled. A single silver line spread across the surface, then another, until the whole expanse shimmered like a vast mirror turning to light. The reflection above bent downward, the real sky dimming as its twin descended. Slowly, gracefully, the moon herself lowered from the firmament, shedding threads of radiance that drifted like petals. She did not fall. She chose to come down. When her feet touched the water, the lake solidified into glass beneath her. Her light cloaked her in silver and frost. Her face was veiled, yet the air itself bowed. Fenrin of the first howl, she said, voice neither warm nor cold. You walk again where night bleeds into memory. Fenrin bowed his head. Luna, you came. I owed you, she said simply. From before time had teeth. Lyra rose to her feet, all softening her voice. You owe him. The moon turned toward her. Once, before light learned to belong to gods, there was only sound and shadow. The first howl tore the veil between them. It gave me shape. Her eyes, 2 pale crescents, softened on Fenrin. When the newborn sun sought to burn me from the sky, it was his voice that anchored me in the world. Without the wolf, there would be no moon, only endless day. Lyra looked at Fenrin, as though seeing him anew. You saved her. He shook his head. I only howled because I was alone. That is why it worked, said the moon. Loneliness is the oldest prayer. She stepped closer, her light spilling over them. Frost formed where her feet passed, yet the air felt tender. You have come far, wolf and child of broken stars. You seek what should not be sought. Lyra lifted her chin. Then tell us why. Tell us what really happened to Sky. The moon's veil fluttered. You already know the story they tell, that it was stolen, hidden, torn away. Lies. All lies meant to hide the truth from those who could not bear it. Then speak it, said Fenrin. She looked up toward the dim heavens, and for a moment even the stars seemed to dim, ashamed to hear. The sky, she said softly, fled. The word struck the air like a bell. Fled. Lyra repeated. Yes. The moon's gaze lowered. Once, the sky was pure awareness, endless, radiant, and alive. But brightness grows hungry. It began to see itself reflected in the eyes of gods and mortals, and what it saw was worship. Worship became weight. It could not bear its own glory. It feared the desire it inspired, feared it might devour everything that looked upon it. And so it ran. Fenrin's eyes burned faintly gold. The light ran away from itself. Exactly, said the moon. It hid behind shadow, leaving me to cradle what fragments remained. I have held them ever since, though they have grown restless. They wish to return, but they still fear their own brilliance. Lyra whispered. Then the darkness wasn't punishment. No, said the moon. It was protection. The fire beside them hissed, as if understanding. Sparks rose and vanished into the night, joining the stars above that refused to shine too bright. Fenrin stood, his form haloed by her light. So we've hunted a coward. The moon tilted her head. You've hunted a child that never learned gentleness. And you defend it? I remember what it was, she said. It wasn't cruel, only terrified of the harm it might cause. The gods built temples to contain its power. Mortals built myths to excuse its absence. But the truth is simpler. The sky left because love without restraint becomes hunger. Lyra looked between them. Then what happens if we bring it back? The moon's expression darkened. Then the world will see again. And seeing is not always mercy. Fenrin stepped forward, his paws crunching against the frozen glass. We've heard that warning before. From Yggdrasil's root, from the ghosts of the gods. Always the same. The world will burn if the sky returns. Then perhaps you should listen, said the moon. He met her gaze, unflinching. I can't, because the world is already burning. Just slowly enough to pretend it's not. A quiet fell between them, vast and personal. The moon studied him for a long while, the silver glow softening. You still carry the river, she said. Its dream runs through you. Do you hear what it says tonight? Fenrin closed his eyes. Inside him, the current murmured, not words, but feeling, longing, endless and raw. It says it wants to go home. The moon smiled sadly. And you? I want to make sure it still exists when it gets there. She reached out and touched his muzzle. Her fingers left trails of light across his fur. Then you are more dangerous than gods, because you still hope. Lyra watched, heart pounding. If the sky ran from its own light, she said softly, then maybe it needs someone to teach it how to shine again without destroying. The moon turned toward her. Perhaps, but that lesson cannot be given. It must be forged. That is why I came. I owe him a debt, but I offer you both a choice. She spread her hands. In one, she held a shard of obsidian darker than shadow. In the other, a fragment of pure moonlight that pulsed faintly like a heart. The dark one, she said, is understanding. It will show you why the sky hid every fear, every wound. The bright one is faith. It will show you how to call it back, even against its will. But take both, and neither will obey. Choose. Lyra looked to Fenrin. His gaze flickered between the two shards. You already know what I'll choose, he said. The light, she whispered. He nodded. Faith. Lyra reached for the dark shard. Then I'll carry the reason it fled. The moon's expression softened. Balanced, then perhaps there's hope after all. She pressed the shards into their hands. When their fingers closed around them, the air filled with song. Faint, strange, half sorrow, half promise. The moon straightened, her form already beginning to fade. I have told you the truth. The sky fled because it feared love without limits. If you bring it back, make sure it learns to love gently, or it will destroy you as it once destroyed itself. Fenrin's eyes glowed. I'll bring it back anyway. The lake quivered beneath his feet, as if the world itself shivered at his defiance. Even if it blinds us, he said, better blindness than a sky that hides. The moon's veil shimmered like water. Then you will need more than faith, Wolf. You will need forgiveness. I've already found it, he said, glancing at Lyra. She met his gaze, her own reflecting moonlight and shadow alike. We'll make the sky remember both. The moon smiled, the kind of smile that had seen every birth and every death and loved them both. Then go. The firmament listens tonight. Follow the tide within you. It knows the path home. She stepped backward onto the lake, her feet leaving no ripple. The surface softened again, returning to water. As she rose, her form dissolved into mist until only her voice remained, echoing across the horizon. When the sky returns, remind of its fear, and teach it to stay anyway. When silence settled again, the world seemed smaller. The fire had gone out, but its embers still glowed faintly blue. Lyra and Fenrin stood side by side, holding their gifts. The dark shard in Lyra's hand pulsed softly, whispering in languages older than creation. The light in Fenrin's paw burned like conviction made flesh. She said it fled because it feared itself, Lyra murmured. What if it still does? Then it needs someone stubborn enough to chase it, Fenrin replied. Someone foolish enough to believe it can come home. Lyra smiled faintly. That sounds like you. He looked to the horizon, where the moon was climbing back into her throne. No, that sounds like us. And so they began their final journey north, toward the edge of the world where night ended and the lost sky waited, trembling in its exile. The moon shone brighter behind them, not in warning, but in blessing, the silent light of a debt repaid and a hope newly born. Spring came like a rumor, cautious and half-believed. Snow retreated from the mountains in trembling patches, revealing earth that hadn't felt the sun in centuries. Rivers thawed and carried reflections of stars that had only just remembered how to shine. The world was waking, unevenly and perfectly, as if unsure it deserved dawn. Fenrin and Lyra walked through villages that hadn't existed the last time the world remembered light. People stared when they passed. They whispered the wolf's name with the same all once reserved for gods long gone. Some knelt, others reached out to touch the air around him, as though his presence itself might bring balance to their cracked soil and fractured hearts. At first, they thought it was gratitude. Then they realized it was worship. It began with a single child, a girl who followed them for 2 days through sleet and silence, refusing to speak until Fenrin finally turned and asked what she wanted. My mother said the river stopped weeping after you drank it, she whispered. So, thank you. He blinked, uncertain what to say. I didn't stop at sorrow. I gave a mouth. She nodded solemnly. Then you gave a hope. She ran back home. By the next morning, a dozen villagers waited outside their camp, leaving offerings of salt, firewood, and carved stones marked with his rune, the spiral of light and dark that a slog had taught him. By the next week, the Brotherhood of Balance was born. The cult spread faster than any seed carried by wind. Its followers built shrines at the crossroads and river mouths, where they recited prayers of duality. To the wolf who howled against stillness, to the mortal who bound sorrow to light, they wore pendants carved with Fenrin's rune. They lit fires of gray flame that burned neither hot nor cold. They spoke of him not as God, but as measure, the force that weighed creation against its ruin. Fenrin despised it. At every campfire, he growled about how faith made prisons of praise. They've twisted my howl into law, he said. They call it balance, but they only want order, a leash to hold the chaos they fear. Lyra, watching him pace beneath a rising moon, said softly, maybe they just want to believe in something that listens back. Then they should talk to each other, he snapped, not to ghosts dressed in fur. Despite his anger, the cult's devotion deepened. They followed the pair wherever they went, pilgrims carrying symbols, chanting hymns that blended sorrow and hope. When Lyra sang by the fire to calm the sky's trembling echoes, the followers repeated her words like sacred verses. When Fenrin refused their offerings, they whispered that humility was his final test for them. One evening, they reached the valley of Lond, where a great temple had once stood, now a skeleton of stone and ivy. To their horror, the Brotherhood had rebuilt it in his name. At its entrance hung banners embroidered with silver thread, depicting Fenrin's likeness, a wolf with eyes of flame, carrying the sun and moon in his jaws. Beneath it, a single phrase written in runes, "Balance is mercy." Fenrin stopped before the gate, fur bristling. "Mercy," he muttered. "They've forgotten what that word costs." A priest in gray robes approached, a woman with a scar across her throat, voice soft as wind over snow. "Lord Fenrin," she said, kneeling. "The world was breaking. You gave it silence without despair. You gave us reason to breathe." "I gave you nothing," he growled. "You took my name and made it a shield." Her gaze lifted calmly. "Then let it shield us. Is that so wrong?" He turned away, unable to answer. That night, Lyra entered the temple alone. Inside, hundreds knelt before a great hearth where flames burned neither bright nor dim, gray and slow, fueled by oils mixed with tears. The air smelled of salt and smoke. On the walls, mortals had written their griefs, their memories, their apologies. She touched one. "For my son, who died in darkness. May the wolf guide him home." Another. "For the husband I could not save. If Balance has a name, let forgive me." Lyra's throat tightened. These were not delusions. These were wounds made into prayers. When she stepped closer to the fire, a young woman turned toward her and smiled. "You're her, aren't you? The singer of light?" Lyra blinked. "Singer?" "We've heard you in dreams," the woman said. "You teach the stars to listen. You're his voice." Lyra didn't know what to say. The weight of their devotion pressed against her like fog. These people had built warmth where there had been only cold. They had made meaning from pain. How could she take that from them? And yet she knew faith this deep could just as easily burn. When she returned to the camp, Fenrin was staring into the fire, jaw tight. "They think I'll save them," he said. "You already have," she answered. He turned sharply. "Don't you start." "I'm not praising you," Lyra said. "I'm saying they've built something from your shadow. Maybe it's not what you wanted, but it's keeping them alive." He laughed bitterly. "Alive, yes. Free, no. They've traded fear for obedience. They worship Balance because they're afraid of what happens when the scales tip again." "Maybe," she said, "but you of all beings should understand. Destruction and creation aren't enemies. They're twins. You've destroyed much, and from it something new has always grown." Fenrin's eyes softened. "You sound like a slog." She was right, Lyra whispered. The forge was never meant to worship the hammer, only to keep shaping what breaks. Days turned into weeks, and the Brotherhood's influence spread. They built smaller forges modeled after Slog's temple, teaching her art of shaping light through sorrow. They forged charms to guide the dying and songs to soothe the grieving. Some said the gray flames could speak, that if you listened closely, you could hear the wolf's voice reminding them, balance is not peace, but purpose. Fenrin avoided the temples, choosing to walk the forest instead. Animals followed him, deer, foxes, birds that had forgotten migration. Nature bent gently to his passing. Yet the peace he offered was uneasy. Lyra found him one night by the river, his reflection broken by the current. "You become what they need," she said. "I've become what I feared," he replied. "Another god who pretends to be less." She crouched beside him. "Maybe the world needs that, too. Not gods who demand, but ones who doubt." He looked at her, and for a moment the bitterness faded. "If doubt is holy," he said, "then we're saints." But doubt spreads like fire. Soon, rival factions formed within the cult. One worshipping the wolf as a destroyer who would cleanse the world's arrogance, another honoring Lyra as the forger who would rebuild it. Their prayers began to clash. Their songs turned into arguments shouted under the same roof. When a storm struck the valley, lightning splitting the rebuilt temple, each side called a sign that they alone were right. Fenrin stood at the temple's threshold, watching as rain poured through the open roof. The gray fire sputtered but did not die. "Do you see?" he said to Lyra. "Even balance demands imbalance to prove itself." She shook her head, rain streaming down her hair. "Maybe this is what balance truly looks like. Not harmony, but tension. Two hands pulling the same rope." He was silent for a long while. And if that rope breaks, then maybe something stronger takes its place, she said softly. Something that knows it can't be perfect. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The temple's banners hung in tatters, the walls scorched, yet the people stayed. They sang quietly as they rebuilt what had fallen, using ashes to draw new runes' resilience. Lyra and Fenrin helped them. He lifted beams as if they were twigs. She hummed, and the light from her voice sealed cracks in the stone. When it was done, they stood at the doorway together. You could leave them, Lyra said. They'd keep believing. Fenrin looked out the horizon, where faint traces of blue returned to the morning sky. Maybe belief isn't the problem, he said. Maybe it's forgetting why you believed. He turned toward the people working, laughing, rebuilding with hands that had once trembled in despair. They're not worshiping me anymore, he realized. They're worshiping what they've become. Lyra smiled. Then let them. He breathed out slowly. Perhaps destruction and creation can share a name after all. She touched his shoulder. What name? He looked toward the rising sun, hesitant, fragile, but true. Life, he said. It's always been life. That evening, as the last of the grave fires burned low, the villagers sang a new hymn, one that Lyra had written without realizing it. It spoke of the wolf who refused to be a god, and of the woman who taught sorrow to glow. It spoke of balance not as law, but as motion, the eternal dance between ending and beginning. And as their voices rose into the twilight, Fenrin tilted his head to the sky and howled. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in wonder. The stars above shimmered faintly in answer, their fear easing, their light returning one heartbeat at a time. For the first time since creation hid itself from its own reflection, the heavens smiled. And below, in a world still learning how to be whole, faith and doubt walked side by side, each holding a fragment of the other's fire. The road east curved into brightness, so constant it burned thought itself. For days, Lyra and Fenrin walked beneath a sky that never changed. Neither dawn nor dusk, only an endless, colorless day. The air itself glittered with metallic sheen, as though every particle carried a shard of mirror. Even the wind refused to move freely. It ricocheted off invisible walls, trapped in patterns too symmetrical to be alive. At last, the mountains opened to reveal the metropolis of crystal, a vast expanse of glass towers rising from polished plains. Every surface caught the light and returned it, folding radiance upon radiance until the city seemed more illusion than substance. There were no shadows. Even the cracks between stones gleamed with their own illumination. Lyra shaded her eyes. How can anything breathe here? Fenrin's fur bristled, faintly smoking in the glare. It doesn't. It only reflects. They descended the marble slope into streets paved with translucent stone. The people who lived there moved with mechanical grace, beautiful, flawless, hollow. Their faces shone like mirrors, their eyes colorless, their voices soft as chimes. They smiled constantly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the soul. When Lyra passed one, she glimpsed her own reflection staring back. For an instant, her face shimmered, and for that instant, she forgot who she was. She stumbled, clutching Fenrin's mane. It tried to take my name. They've traded theirs already, he said grimly. That's how the light keeps itself alive. In the center of the city stood a tower of perfect symmetry, its base encircled by pools of white fire. There were no doors, only an archway of radiance. The people called it the apex, and they bowed to it as they passed. Their prayers were silent but exact, shaped by rhythm, not emotion. Lyra stopped to watch a group kneel before it. Their lips moved in unison. We are light. We are complete. We do not dream. Her heart clenched. They don't even hope. Fenrin's growl rolled low in his chest. They've mistaken blindness for purity. He stepped forward, but the moment his shadow touched the nearest pool, alarms chimed, not as sound, but as vibration through the air. The crowd turned, faces serene, eyes empty. Imperfection, they whispered together. Correction required. They advanced slowly, hands outstretched, and their palms shone like polished glass. Lyra tried to speak, but her voice dissolved in the brightness. Fenrin snarled, and his growl was the first noise the city had heard in 1,000 years. The people stopped, startled by the alien shape of sound. "What are you?" one asked, expression smooth and featureless. "Alive," Fenrin said. "Try it sometime." He moved toward the apex. With each step, the light bent away from him, reluctant to touch fur that remembered night. When he reached the base of the tower, he looked up. The structure had no top. It merged with the sky itself, a pillar of condensed brilliance that hummed like a single endless note. Lyra caught up, breathless. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her, eyes blazing gold and silver. "What I was born to." Fenrin, enough of gods hiding behind perfection. He lifted his head and howled. The sound cracked the sky, not metaphorically, literally. A thin fissure spread above them, black and infinite, splitting the flawless blue like the first wound in creation. The light screamed, a shrill, harmonic wail that echoed to the crystal towers. Windows shattered into rainbows. Statues fractured. People clutched their heads as cracks appeared on their skin, light spilling from within like molten glass. Lyra fell to her knees, covering her ears. The brightness was fighting back, flailing in panic. "Fenrin," she shouted. "They'll die." "No," he growled, voice deep as earth. "They'll wake." He widened the howl, forcing it through the fissure, tearing the perfect heavens open. From beyond poured shadow, not darkness as terror, but as balance. Cool, soft, forgiving. The first true night this city had ever known descended like rain. The white fire in the pools flickered and went out. The towers dimmed to transparency, revealing the stars beyond them for the first time. And the people stopped glowing. For a heartbeat, all was silence. Then the first gas broke it. A sound small, human, miraculous. A man clutched his chest as though realizing it existed. A child touched the ground and whispered, cold. Another looked up at the fractured sky and began to cry. Fenrin stood amidst them, breathing heavily, the runes along his muzzle flickering between light and dark. "Breathe," he commanded softly. "You're not dying. You're feeling." The people stared, trembling. Some fell to their knees, overcome by the shock of imperfection, of warmth and chill, joy and grief. Lyra ran to them, taking their hands one by one. "It's all right," she whispered. "The dark doesn't erase you. It makes you real." A woman touched her own face, tracing tears as though they were precious metals. "What is this?" she asked. "It's shadow," Lyra said. "It's mercy." At first they were terrified. Many tried to rekindle their inner light, clawing at their reflections, desperate to return to the safety of constant radiance. But no light came, only trembling and breath, raw and unfiltered. Then, somewhere in the crowd, a man began to laugh. It wasn't mockery. It was a laugh of disbelief, of life rediscovered. It spread, hesitant at first, then wild. Laughter rose from every street, echoing to the crystal towers, shaking loose the remnants of the city's perfection. For the first time in eternity, the sound of imperfection filled the air. Lyra felt tears on her own face. Fenrin's ears twitched and a faint, incredulous smile crept into his voice. "They're laughing. They're alive," she said. "They're free." As night deepened, the city transformed. Without constant light, its crystal structures softened, revealing patterns hidden within, veins of color, streaks of shadow, reflections of stars now visible overhead. The people built fires that flickered and danced instead of burning eternal. Children pressed their hands into the soot, marveling at the way darkness clung to their skin. One elder approached Fenrin, bowing low. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "We had no pain, no fear." Fenrin looked down at him. "You also had no wonder." The elder hesitated. "And what are we now?" Fenrin glanced at Lyra. She smiled gently. "Now," she said, "you're dreamers." That night, they gathered in the city square, no longer afraid of the sky. The moon appeared from behind torn clouds, casting silver light across faces still streaked with soot and tears. Lyra sang softly, a song without words, built from breath and gratitude. The people joined her, humming, creating music that shimmered like broken glass and wind. Fenrin lay beside the extinguished pool, watching them. They'll rebuild, he said. They'll try to make it perfect again. Maybe, said Lyra, but they'll remember what imperfection feels like. You can't unlearn awe. He closed his eyes, tired but at peace. Awe, he murmured. That's what the sky lost when it fled. Lyra looked upward. Maybe that's what we're bringing back. Not the light itself, but the courage to stand beneath it. By morning, the city had changed its name. The people painted on every wall, every tower. Skarnheim, city of shadow and song. They chose it themselves. No gods, no councils, no laws. Just gratitude. When Fenrin and Lyra left at dawn, a crowd followed them to gates, carrying lanterns half filled with soot, half with flame, symbols of their rebirth. They called blessings after them, not prayers. May your path stay uneven. May your hearts remain unfinished. Lyra smiled as they walked away. You become legend again. Fenrin huffed softly. No, legends end. This, he nodded toward the city now pulsing with both darkness and light. This begins. They looked back one last time. From afar, Skarnheim shimmered not as crystal, but as living glass, breathing shadow and starlight in equal measure. It glowed softly, not too bright, never too still. For the first time in its long existence, the city dreamed. And somewhere far above, the wounded sky stirred, perhaps curious, perhaps jealous, feeling the pulse of mortal laughter rise through its fractures. The ocean began where silence ended. Beyond the last dunes of Skarnheim stretched a sheet of silver so vast that it erased the horizon, smooth as glass and still as hell breath. It was not water, not truly, but remembrance given form. Every ripple carried an echo, every glint of light a story half forgotten. Those who sailed it were said to vanish into their own reflections, swallowed by the weight of what might have been. Fenrin and Lyra stood at its edge at dawn. The tide whispered without sound, drawing lines in the sand that glowed faintly before vanishing. Lyra touched the surface with her hand. The sea did not wet her fingers. It rippled instead, revealing faint images beneath, shadows of herself, infinite, each turning away from the next. This isn't water, she murmured. It's memory. Fenrin nodded slowly. The sea of memory, where time rehearses what it could not perform. He stepped forward. The surface accepted his paw, rippling once, then holding firm. It remembers me, he said quietly. It remembers everything, came the wind's faint reply. They walked together onto mirrored expanse, the world around them dissolving into reflection. The sky, the shore, the very air folded into layers of light and shadow until above and below were the same. Each step sent rings of possibilities spiraling outward. Hours or centuries passed. Time lost count here. Lyra watched their reflections move beside them, but something was wrong. They didn't follow perfectly. When she raised her hand, her reflection hesitated, then turned its palm the other way. When she smiled, it frowned. Fenrin, she whispered, they're not us. He turned, and his reflection did the same, but behind it walked another, taller, darker, its fur black as night without stars. It bared teeth of fire, its eyes pools of hunger. Fenrin froze. I know that shape. It's you, Lyra said. No, he murmured, eyes narrowing. It's what I was before the world learned my name. The dark wolf prowled closer, each step cracking the surface into shards that healed instantly. When it spoke, the sound was thunder folded into whisper. Why did you stop hunting? It asked. The chase was your truth, the kill your prayer. Fenrin's chest rose and fell. Because I learned that killing isn't the same as ending. The shadow laughed, a deep, cruel sound that made the sea tremble. You were worshipped by fear, not faith. You were a god of endings. And now you kneel beside mortals, begging light for permission to exist. He bared his fangs, the runes along his muzzle flaring. I kneel to no one. Then prove it. The reflection hissed. End me or become me again. The water surged, drawing them into a storm of mirrors. Lyra reached for him, but her own reflection seized her wrist. It was her face, her voice, but older, colder, eyes like sharpened glass. The woman that might have been. Don't, said the reflection. Let him fall. You've done enough following. Lyra tried to pull away, but the grip was iron. "Who are you?" "I'm what you left behind," said the other Lyra. "The girl who stayed home. The one who never followed a wolf into madness." Images swirled in the reflection beneath them. A life of safety, of simplicity. A cottage by the river. Children. Age. Peace. It looked so small and so unbearably warm. "You could have had this," her reflection whispered. "A life untouched by gods and ghosts. No sorrow heavy enough to forge light. No endless war between what should be and what is." Lyra's throat tightened. "I would have been blind. You would have been whole." Around them, the sea churned, each wave another version of their lives. Fenrin wrestled his darker self, their claws sparking light where they struck. For every wound he made, another open on his own body. The sea had no mercy for those who fought their own reflection. Lyra could feel the same pull within her, the temptation to look longer, to surrender to the calm her reflection offered. The more she watched, the heavier her limbs became, until she could barely breathe. "You can't fight memory," said her other self gently. "You can only drown in it." Lyra shook her head. "Then I'll drown standing." With a cry, she pulled free, the sound slicing to the mirrored air like thunder. Her reflection shattered into fragments, each carrying a piece of her, laughter, pain, courage, before dissolving into the sea. Fenrin stumbled toward her, bleeding light. The darker wolf stalked behind him, unharmed, smiling. "You can't kill me," it said. "I am what the world made you. I am hunger without guilt." "No," Fenrin growled. "You're hunger without purpose." He lowered his head, runes glowing. Lyra pressed her palm against his flank, lending strength. Together they spoke a single word, one that belonged to neither god nor mortal. The word was forgive. The sound rippled through the sea, shaking its mirrors apart. The dark wolf howled, its body unraveling into smoke. The water quieted, and Fenrin collapsed to his knees, panting. The reflection lingered for a heartbeat longer, now just a shadow of sadness, before dissolving entirely. Lyra knelt beside him, touching his fur. "It's gone." He shook his head. "No, it's part of me again, the part that knows what it means to hunger and still choose restraint." She smiled through tears. "Then maybe we both needed to meet what we weren't." They sat together, surrounded by stillness. The sea had stilled to perfect calm once more, reflecting a sky that was neither bright nor dark, a color that belonged only to memory. As they rested, the surface began to show them new visions, not what they'd lost, but of what might still come. They saw cities reborn in shadow and song, mortals laughing beneath imperfect suns. They saw the moon watching from her silver throne, smiling faintly. Then came the final image, a sky, vast and trembling, its light flickering like a wounded heart. It looked afraid. Fenrin exhaled. "So that's where we're going." Lyra nodded. "To wake it." He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, reverent. "The sea wanted to remind us that we could still be lost." "But we weren't," she said. "No," he agreed. "We remembered each other instead." They walked onward, and as they did, the water beneath them began to change. It grew warmer, shallower, more transparent, until they could see to its depths. Below them drifted the remnants of everything forgotten. Faces of gods, fragments of constellations, prayers that had never been answered. The sea of memory was giving up its ghosts, cleansing itself in the wake of their passage. At its farthest edge stood a single arch of coral and light, the gateway that led out of remembrance. Its frame was carved with runes Fenrin had once inscribed with his reforged fangs, back when he still believed truth could be fixed in stone. Lyra touched the arch as they stepped through. "Do you think we'll see them again?" "The ones we might have been?" he asked. "Yes." He glanced back at the glimmering water. "Maybe, but if we do, I hope they forgive us for choosing differently." As they emerged, dawn broke across the world, a real dawn, fragile and gold. Behind them, the sea of memory rippled once, then stilled, its surface sealing like a page turned and read. Fenrin shook himself, scattering drops of light that hissed into steam where they touched the ground. "It's strange," he said. "For the first time, I don't feel haunted." Lyra smiled. Maybe because we made peace with our ghosts. He looked at her, eyes soft. No, because now I have something worth haunting. She laughed, the sound echoing over the quiet sea. And far above, the fractured sky flickered once, a pulse of light, hesitant and tender, as if the heavens themselves had seen what forgiveness looked like and wanted to learn how to do it too. The wind changed before they saw it. A cold older than creation swept across the land, erasing footprints as it passed. Every breath turned to glass. Every thought slowed until it felt heavy enough to shatter. Even Fenrin, who had run through 1,000 winters, lowered his head against it. They had reached the northern edge of the world, where maps surrendered and language froze in the throat. Before them, the horizon rose like a wall of breathing ice. Winter's fortress, a citadel of storm and silence that shifted shape with every heartbeat. Its towers grew from clouds and snow, then melted into sky, only to reform again in patterns that defied reason. Lightning crawled through the blizzard like veins of frozen light. Thunder rolled upward instead of down. The air shimmered with snow that never fell. Each flake suspended midair, a note in an endless chord. Fenrin stopped at the threshold, hackles bristling. She's awake. Lyra's breath misted. Scott T. He nodded. Mother of stillness. She's older than the gods who built prayers. She taught the world to rest between heartbeats. Lyra swallowed. And if she doesn't want us here? He smiled grimly. Then we'll learn what eternity feels like from the inside. They stepped forward. The storm closed around them like a mouth. For a moment there was no up, no down, only whiteness and the sound of their own pulses echoing in their skulls. The cold wasn't temperature. It was memory without movement. The weight of everything that had ever stopped and never started again. When their vision cleared, they stood inside a hall carved from ice so pure it seemed invisible. Columns of frost reached toward a ceiling lost in clouds. The floor was a mirror of frozen lake, beneath which shapes drifted, not fish, but moments. A falling tear, a hand reaching for another, a bird mid-flight, all trapped between seconds. And at the far end, upon a throne woven from auroras and bone, sat Scotty. She was vast and unmoving, her skin pale as snowfall under moonlight. Her eyes were glaciers that had watched continents drift. A crown of frost rimed her hair, and when she spoke, her voice didn't travel through air. It slid directly into the marrow. "So," said the goddess, "the wolf who broke silence and the child who sings light have come to disturb what must never wake." Lyra tried to bow, but the air itself resisted movement. "We mean no harm. We seek the sky, to bring balance where fear made flight." Scotty's gaze flicked toward Fenrin. "And you little storm, you who bit the edge of creation and called it truth." Fenrin met her stare, unflinching. "I came to finish what the gods started, or undo it." A slow, amused hum vibrated the ice. "Finish, undo, repeat. Such is a heartbeat of existence. You think balance is motion, but balance is pause." Her hand rose. Snow spiraled from her palm. Then pause and see. Time stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The air solidified. Lyra's breath froze mid-exhale. A crystal cloud suspended before her lips. Fenrin's growl became a visible ripple, half-formed and immovable. Even thought thickened, turning viscous inside their minds. They could still see, still feel, but they could not move. Only Scotty remained free, her eyes twin stars buried in frost. She walked among them, not as a giant, but as stillness itself taking shape. When she touched Fenrin's fur, frost blossomed along his back like silver vines. When she brushed Lyra's cheek, the shard of starlight at her throat dimmed until it was nearly gone. "Fear is motion," she said softly. "You chase what runs. You fight what flees. Without fear, you would not breathe. Without stillness, you would never know you're alive. You think you seek the sky, but you are running from your own trembling." Her words hung in the frozen air like runes carved from sound. "If you would walk beyond my fortress," she continued, "forgive your fear. Not destroy it. Forgive it. Only then will time remember you." Then she was gone. Only the silence of stopped seconds remained. Lyra struggled inside her prison of ice and thought. The more she resisted, the more the frost thickened around her heart. Panic flared. Not because she would die, but because she would remain forever on the verge of movement, a heartbeat that never completed. Her mind filled with echoes. All the moments she'd hesitated, the prayers she hadn't spoken, the truths she'd silenced out of fear. She saw herself as a child, hiding from the voices of the wind. As a woman, afraid of the light that burned in her hands. Fear made me cautious, she thought. Fear kept me alive. And then another thought whispered back. Her mother's voice carried from memory. Fear kept you alive, but it never let you live. Tears melted the frost at the corner of her eyes. I forgive you, she whispered to her own trembling. You were trying to protect me. The ice around her heart cracked, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The shard at her neck glowed again, faint but warm. Fenrin, trapped beside her, faced a different prison. Inside his stillness, he saw the forest of his first hunt. Blood steaming on snow, the cries of prey, the ecstasy of dominion. He felt again the guilt that had chased him for eons, the fear that he was still only a beast pretending at mercy. You will always be hunger, a voice snarled, his old self, the echo from the sea of memory. You will ruin everything you touch. He wanted to argue, but the words froze in his throat. Instead, he closed his eyes. For the first time, he looked at the fear instead of away from it. It wasn't a monster. It was a cub, small, trembling, terrified of being unloved. Slowly, he lowered his head. I forgive you, he told it silently. You were my first fire. The frost around his paws cracked. His body warmed, steam rising from his fur. A sound, the faintest heartbeat, returned the world. Time gasped. The storm that had been holding its breath exhaled in a rush of snow. The frozen air began to move again. Lyra stumbled forward. Fenrin shook off shards of ice that hissed into mist. Their pulses returned, irregular but alive. From a throne, Skadi watched, smiling faintly, or perhaps that was only the shape of thawing frost. So, she said, you remembered how to move. Lyra bowed deeply. We forgave what we feared. Then you have learned stillness, the goddess replied. True motion is born only from peace with pause. She descended the steps, her bare feet leaving trails of frost that turned to water. Few reach me and leave as themselves. You, however, she touched Lyra's forehead, then Fenrin's. You leave as the first thaw. The fortress shuddered. Cracks spread through the ice, each one glowing with blue fire. The storm outside began to break, its roar fading into the sigh of melting snow. Skadi raised a hand, pointing northward, toward a horizon where light shimmered like a curtain of gold behind white mist. Beyond that ridge lies the sky's wound, where light first tore itself apart. You'll find what you seek there, though I doubt you'll find what you expect. Lyra hesitated. And you? Will winter end with us? The goddess laughed softly, and the sound made icicles sing. Child, I do not end. I rest. When the world forgets how to pause again, I will wake. She lifted her gaze to Fenrin, wolf of balance. Singer of storms, your howl broke the heavens, but your silence mended them. Remember that both belong to you. He bowed his head. Thank you, mother. Skadi stepped back onto her throne. Frost climbed her skin again, sealing her in silver serenity. Go now, she said, before the stillness loves you too much to let you leave. As they stepped beyond the gates, the fortress behind them dissolved into wind. Snow fell for the first time in an age, gentle, weightless, alive. Each flake shimmered briefly before melting into the earth, whispering fragments of the goddess's voice. Rest between steps. Even light must breathe. Lyra looked back once, her hair glinting with frost. She was beautiful. Fenrin nodded. All endings are. They turned north. The land sloped upward, toward a horizon burning with soft gold. Between the peaks, they could see the faint pulse of something vast, a wound in the firmament, throbbing with light too bright to bear. Lyra reached for Fenrin's shoulder. That's it, she whispered. The sky's wound. He took a deep breath. Then let's make sure it remembers how to forgive, too. Together, they walked toward the light, leaving footprints that steamed in the snow. Proof that even in the heart of stillness, movement had found a way to live again. The path to the eastern horizon wound through a valley of ash and gold. The snow left by Scothy's blessing melted behind them, giving way to scorched soil that shimmered faintly under unseen heat. Each step carried them closer to warmth that was not comforting, the kind of heat that devours as it gives. For 3 days and 3 nights, they walked beneath a sky that pulsed faintly, as though the heavens themselves had begun to stir. The light that was not sunlight, it was memory of sunlight, flickering, uncertain, yearning for form. At dawn on the 4th day, they saw it, a mountain split in half, its heart glowing with buried flame. The wind that rose from its fissure smelled of iron and sorrow. "The sun's forge," Fenrin murmured. His voice held no triumph, only reverence. Lyra felt it too, away in the air, like standing before the pulse of creation. "This is where it began?" "Yes," he said. "Before gods, before names. Here, light was shaped by will alone. The first breath of warmth, the first lie against the cold." They descended into the mountain scar. The path spiraled downward through caverns lined with glass that reflected not their bodies, but their souls. Fenrin's glow flickering like a wolf made of twilight. Lyra's outline humming softly with music too low to hear. The deeper they went, the warmer became, until the air itself sang. The hum of the forge was constant, slow, massive, like a sleeping heart remembering how to beat. When they reached the bottom, they found a chamber vast as the night sky. Columns of obsidian and molten gold supported a ceiling that dripped fire like rain, and in the center stood the forge of the sun. It wasn't a furnace. It was an altar. Its anvil was the size of a hill, carved from the remains of a fallen star. The hammer that lay beside it was older than memory, its handle wrapped in woven starlight, its head engraved with runes that no tongue could speak. And above it all, suspended in midair, hovered a sphere of extinguished fire. The first light, cold and dark, waiting to be reborn. Fenrin approached first. The heat of the place pressed against his fur like judgment. He could feel every sin he'd ever committed ignite along his bones. "The sun's forge doesn't burn wood or coal," he said. "It burns sacrifice." Lyra touched the surface of the anvil, and the metal pulsed beneath her hand, warm and alive. "Then we have to give it something it can believe in." A whisper filled the air, not from the forge, but from what lingered in it. "All things that shine are paid for in loss." The hammer rose slowly from the ground, hovering between them. It seemed to weigh more than mountains. Fenrin reached for it, but his paw passed through, not from weakness, but because the forge did not accept him yet. Lyra stepped closer, her heart pounding. "It needs a cost." She looked at him then, at the wolf who had carried the river, who had carved truth into the world, who had laughed at gods and taught silence how to sing. She knew what she could give. She had known it since the sea of memory. "My years," she said quietly. "Take them." Fenrin turned sharply. "No. Every dawn I've seen, every breath I've left, let the forge have them. I was born from borrowed starlight. Let me pay it back." "Lyra, it won't kill me," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "It will just make me older faster. Time will flow through me to the light. I'll live, but I'll burn a little every day." Fenrin growled, low and broken. "You don't know the world that." "Maybe not," she whispered, "but it's the only thing I still own." The forge flared faintly, as if listening. Then Fenrin stepped forward. His shadow stretched across the chamber, swallowing the golden reflections around them. "If she gives time," he said, "then I give name." Lyra's eyes widened. "Your name?" He nodded. "A wolf's name is a soul. Without it, I'll be just another creature. The stories, the worship, the memory of me, all gone. Forgotten, even by the world itself." She reached out. "You'll vanish." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's balance. You give the future, I give the past." The forge roared, a sound deeper than thunder, more ancient than fire. The hammer ignited, burning with blue flame. Lyra took his paw. "If we do this, there's no going back. Then we go forward," he said, simply. They stepped together to the anvil. The hammer hovered between them, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. Lyra placed her hand on the anvil, and Fenrin laid his paw beside it. Their reflections merged in the molten metal, one shape of shadow and light intertwined. "Speak your offerings," commanded the forge. Lyra closed her eyes. "I give my mortal years, so that light may remember what it feels like to fade." Fenrin followed, voice low but steady. "I give my name, so that light may remember what it feels like to belong." The chamber inhaled. The very air drew in around them. The forge blazed white hot. It began to burn. Lyra felt time flow out of her, not as pain, but as melody. Every heartbeat sang, "Another year away." Her hair turned from gold to silver, her skin faintly translucent, glowing from within. But she did not falter. She kept her palm pressed to the anvil, humming the song that Skadi had given her, a song that taught even stillness how to breathe. Fenrin felt his name unravel inside him. It wasn't just sound. It was everything that had ever answered when someone called. He felt the memories of mortals fade, the prayers, the fears, the myths that bore his likeness. He watched his own reflection blur until it no longer had a mouth to speak it. Yet in the emptiness that followed, he felt something deeper, peace. The silence left behind by the loss of a name was not void, it was space. Space for something new. The hammer fell once. The sound rippled through creation. The sphere above the forge cracked open, spilling molten gold across the air. The light that poured forth was not blinding but kind. It reached for them like a hand remembering warmth. It filled the chamber, touching every corner, every wound. Fenrin howled, not in pain, but in awe. Lyra's song joined his voice, weaving together until sound and flame became one. The forge's glow surged, spilling upward through the mountain. Far above, the sky, the real sky, shuddered, clouds parted. The first sunrise in eons began to bloom. Outside, mountains blazed like glass. Rivers reflected fire instead of stars. The world awoke to color it had never seen before. Not gold or white, but the hue of forgiveness itself, that fragile radiance between sorrow and joy. Inside the forge, the flames began to settle. Lyra staggered. Her hair now white as ash, but her eyes shone like morning. Fenrin stood beside her, silent, his form half shadow now, half light and utterly still. "Did it work?" she whispered. He looked upward, where the new dawn pulsed. The sky breathed again. Then she saw it. His reflection in the molten gold behind him. It was empty. No name, no rune, just a shape remembered by love. "Fenrin," she said softly. He turned to her with a smile that had no label, no history. "That's not my name anymore," he said, "but it's still me." She laughed through her tears. "Then whoever you are, thank you." He lowered his head, touching his forehead to hers. "Thank you for remembering." The forge quieted, its task complete. The hammer cooled. The sphere dissolved into sunrise. Around them, the walls of the mountain began to crack, releasing streams of molten light that flowed upward, not downward, into the heavens. Outside, dawn spread like forgiveness. The rivers of the world began to hum. The moon shed a single tear of joy. The constellations that had long been scattered started to drift closer, forming faint new patterns across the morning sky. Fenrin and Lyra stood side by side at the mouth of the forge, bathed in golden light. "So this is the first light," she said. He nodded. "No, this is the second chance." She smiled. "Then let's not waste it." They stepped into the sunlight together, leaving behind the place where fire was born and where two souls, through loss, had remade the sky. The dawn had returned and the world exhaled. Every mountain peak burned with the gold of forgiveness. Every river reflected the newborn sky. For the first time since memory began, even silence seemed to glow. But far above this blooming day, something old stirred, something that had watched the world through 1,000 frozen eons, resentful and unseen. It was a night, mother of rest, keeper of secrets, now abandoned by the light she had once protected. She had loved the world in her own quiet way, holding it gently while it slept, hiding its scars beneath stars so to heal unseen. But now, dawn spread endlessly, and the darkness had nowhere left to live. And so the night grew jealous. It began with a wind that smelled of ash and honey, curling between the clouds as Lyra and Fenrin crossed the heavens. The path they walked was no longer earth, but sky, a bridge of pale fire stretching from one horizon to the other. Below them, the world sang softly, the newborn light touching every valley, every face. Lyra looked down, her silver hair glinting. "They're waking," she whispered. "The fields are blooming again. The rivers remember their songs." Fenrin nodded, his golden eyes faintly dimmer than before. Light has that effect. He didn't notice the shadow behind him yet, not until the air began to hum, not with warmth, but with longing. From the trailing edge of dawn, the night rose. She took shape as she fell, a woman woven of stars and sorrow, her hair flowing like ink through water. Her eyes were twin eclipses, her mouth a crescent between threat and prayer. Every step she took across the bridge dimmed it, turning flame to reflection, gold to silver. When she spoke, her voice was velvet and venom in equal measure. "Fenrin of no name," she said, "and the girl who traded time for fire. Did you think dawn would last forever?" Lyra turned sharply, shielding her eyes. "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "I am what comes after. I am the pause that mercy forgets." Fenrin stiffened. "Night." Her gaze softened. "My child," she said, and for a moment her tone held no malice. "You were born of me once, the first howl that echoed through my silence. You belonged to the dark long, before you borrowed the light." The wind grew colder. Lyra could feel it pressing against her skin, carrying whispers that weren't quite sound, truth spoken too gently to be denied. "What do you want?" she asked. "Only what was mine," said the night. "You've torn the veil I wove to protect the world from its own brilliance. You've made mortals see again, and soon they will worship what blinds them. They will build fires too bright to share. Every light becomes cruelty eventually." Lyra shook her head. "This light was born of sacrifice, not conquest." "Sacrifice becomes pride," the night replied, her voice darkening. "Pride becomes hunger, and hunger becomes flame." She turned her eyes to Fenrin. "You know this, don't you?" Fenrin hesitated. The sky trembled beneath them. He looked down, saw cities shining below, temples already rising to honor the dawn, songs written in his absence. The mortals who had laughed when darkness returned were laughing again now, but louder, brighter, more desperate. They worshipped light, not as warmth, but as victory. And victory, Fenrin knew, always needed something to conquer. The night's words slithered through him like an old melody. "Every flame believes itself gentle," she whispered, "until it runs out of shadow to comfort." He remembered the old days when he had hunted beneath her stars, guided by her stillness. She had not been cruel then. She had simply been honest. He turned to Lyra, his voice low. "What if she's right?" Lyra's eyes widened. Fenrin, "Look at them," he said, motioning toward the world below. "They already worship the light. The same fire we gave to free them will blind them next. The night knows this. She's seen it before." The night smiled, hearing his doubt. "You cannot hold balance with hands that burn," she murmured. "Come back to the dark. Let it cool you." Lyra stepped between them. The air around her shimmered with faint radiance, her starlight heartbeat answering the night's gloom. "No," she said. "We can't undo what's begun. The world needs both, your shadow and his light. One without the other isn't mercy. It's madness." The night tilted her head. "And yet, it is always light that forgets to share." Fenrin flinched. The runes that once adorned his muzzle glimmered faintly, their meanings fraying. He could feel his resolve melting under her voice, her truth, her sorrow. "She's not wrong," he said softly. "I've seen what worship does. Even when I was still a god, they took my name and turned it into law. What happens when they do the same with the dawn?" "They won't," Lyra insisted. "They've learned. We've learned. Have we?" The question hung between them, heavy as fate. The night moved closer, her steps soundless. Around her, stars gathered like petals in reverse bloom. "Light always promises equality," she whispered, circling them like smoke, "but it shines strongest on those who stand highest." The rest live in glare or shadow. Let me end it before it begins again. Let me fold the dawn back into sleep. Fenrin's body tensed. His claws scraped the glass of the bridge, leaving streaks of shadow. The night extended her hand toward him, pale, trembling, maternal. "Come home," she said. "Let the world rest once more. Let light fade before it learns to harm." Lyra reached for him. "Fenrin, no." He looked between them. The night, whose darkness had once given him peace, and Lyra, whose light had taught him purpose. Both were right, both were wrong, and the choice between them tore him in two. "I don't know anymore," he said. "Maybe balance isn't something we keep. Maybe it's something we lose again and again, just to remember what it means." The night's eyes gleamed with triumph and pity. "Then lose it one last time," she murmured. She opened her arms. The wind howled, a sound both invitation and command. The bridge trembled. Shadows spilled across the dawn like ink across parchment, smothering its gold. Lyra cried out as the darkness rushed forward. She held out her hands, calling the light she had helped forge, but it flickered uncertainly. Dimmed by Fenrin's hesitation, poisoned by doubt, the night's laughter was soft, almost kind. "See? Even the light doubts itself. That is how it dies." Fenrin stood motionless, the glow in his eyes fading. "Maybe it should," he whispered. The bridge began to crack. The dawn quivered, retreating. Below, the world felt the tremor, the brief shiver of daylight hesitating. Lyra reached for him again, voice breaking. "You can't believe her." He turned slowly. "She's telling the truth." For a moment, time froze, a heartbeat caught between faith and despair. Lyra's face was pale against the storm of shadow. "Then what are we fighting for?" she whispered. Fenrin looked at her, and something shifted behind his eyes. "Not for truth," he said. "For choice." He turned back to the night. "You're right. Every light becomes cruel if it forgets the dark. But cruelty isn't born in the flame. It's born when we stop sharing it." The night's expression flickered, surprise, then sadness. "And you think mortals will remember to share?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but they deserve the chance to try." For the first time, the night's voice faltered. "You sound like the sun." He smiled faintly. "I learned from a moon." The night's hand fell around her. The stars dimmed, their edges blurring into gray. "So be it," she said. "But remember this, wolf without name. The brighter the light, the longer the shadow it casts. One day you will stand inside that shadow and wonder if you've saved anything at all." "I already wonder," he said. And with that, she vanished, dissolving into wind and glittering dust, leaving only her whisper echoing across the sky. Every dawn is a wound. Every night is the bandage that remembers. The world stilled again. Lyra approached Fenrin carefully, placing a hand on his shoulder. His fur was cold, his gaze distant. "She's gone," Lyra said softly. He nodded. "No, she's waiting. She always is. Do you still doubt?" He looked at the horizon where darkness bled into morning. "Always. That's how I know I'm still alive." She smiled sadly. "Then let's keep walking." They did, across the trembling bridge of dawn, their shadows stretching behind them, long and alive. And far beyond the curve of the sky, the night watched them go, her face hidden, her eyes wet with something that was not hate. Because even jealousy, like light, begins in love. The sky had never been so bright, nor so cruel. After the night's retreat, the heavens flared with divine order. Clouds solidified into marble. Thunder carried the voices of gods who had long been silent, awakened now by the return of light. The pantheon had been waiting, not for dawn, but for control. They came not as figures of flesh, but as storms given shape, as pillars that will dressed in radiance. Each god bore the symbol of what they ruled: justice, war, faith, silence, mercy. But their eyes were mirrors of one another, cold, flawless, and afraid. The echo of their summons rolled across creation. It wasn't a sound, but a command. Every living thing, mortal, spirit, or godless beast, felt it in their bones. The order to kneel. Fenrin did not kneel, and for that they chained him. The tribunal stood upon Etherium, a platform of pure light suspended above the world. Below, the continent shone faintly, still newborn under the reborn sun. Above, the firmament quivered, the scar of the sky's wound glowing faintly like an open eye. Fenrin was bound to the center by chains of runic fire, each link forged from divine obedience itself. They didn't burn his flesh, but his freedom. Every attempt to move made the chains grow tighter, their whispers filling his ears. Obey, obey, obey. Lyra stood beside him, unchained but surrounded by a ring of seraphic guards. Their wings were carved from glass. Their eyes never blinked. At the dais above them, 12 thrones shimmered with godlight. The eldest among them, Astrion, the keeper of cosmic law, spoke first. Wolf of balance, the voice boomed, filling eternity. You have torn the fabric of divine order. You howled against silence, shattered the stillness of winter, unmade the temples of light, and kindled fire without sanction. You have made mortals forget reverence. What say you? Fenrin lifted his head. His eyes, stripped of their name but not of their defiance, met the gods without flinching. I say reverence should never outweigh mercy. A murmur rippled through the court. Lightning cracked in disapproval. Astrian's tone sharpened. And mercy without order is chaos. You have led creation astray. I led it toward choice, Fenrin said quietly. Something your laws have forgotten how to permit. The gods stirred. Their halos pulsed with agitation, each whispering through the light. Blasphemy, insolence, pride. Astrion raised his hand, silencing them. You speak as though you are equal to the divine. Fenrin smiled faintly. No, just equal to your mistakes. The chains tightened, hissing with divine fury. Lyra stepped forward, but one of the seraphs moved to block her path. She looked to Astrion, her voice clear, unshaken. Then try him for what he truly did, she said. Not for defying you, but for showing the world that even gods can change. A low, dangerous rumble passed through the Etherium. Mortal, Astrion said, you speak out of turn. I speak because he cannot, Lyra replied. You bound him for disobedience, but you never asked why he disobeyed. Because divine law is reason enough. Then your law is fear, she said, and fear is not reason. The tribunal darkened. The gods leaned forward. Her words carried the pulse of the forge still burning inside her chest, the echo of sacrifice and starlight. When she spoke again, her voice did not shake. It rang like truth hammered against eternity. You say balance is obedience, she began, but obedience is the death of balance. Order without doubt is tyranny, even when it glows. The god of justice rose. You would place mortals above heaven? No, said Lyra. I would place living above perfect. The world isn't meant to be still. It's meant to sway, to fall and rise again. Even your stars tremble, not because they are weak, but because motion is what keeps them alive. Another god, the one of faith, hissed, blasphemy. You seek to unmake harmony. Lyra turned to her. Harmony isn't silence. Harmony is sound that listens. If your heaven can't bend, then it deserves to break. A flash of white light struck the platform. It missed her by inches, splitting the air with heat. The seraph stepped forward, weapons raised. But Astrion raised his hand again, halting them. Let her speak, he said coldly. Let her hang herself with her own words. Lyra's breath came shallow, but she didn't back down. She looked at Fenrin, whose eyes burned faintly through the chains. He gave no nod, only silence, but it was enough. She turned back to the gods. You call yourselves guardians of balance, she said, but you chained the one being who ever understood it. Fenrin gave up his name, his identity, so light could be born without ownership, and you call that defiance. Astrian's voice thundered. He broke the covenant between divine and mortal. No, Lyra said, stepping closer to the dais. He fulfilled it. You made the world in your image, but it was the wolf who taught it to see its reflection without worshiping it. You say he broke your laws, but maybe your laws were already broken, cracked by pride, bound by fear of being forgotten. The hall flickered. The pillars of light shuddered. The god of silence rose, her voice like wind through snow. Enough. The mortal speaks poison. Lyra met her gaze. Then your heaven must be made of glass. The Etherium began to quake. Below, the clouds twisted into whirlpools. Mortals across the world looked up, feeling the tremor in their souls, something in the fabric of heaven itself fracturing. Astrian's composure faltered. You dare accuse the Pantheon of fear? I don't accuse, said Lyra. I recognize. I've seen what happens when gods try to cage the world. I've seen what stillness does to mercy. And I've seen what freedom does to faith. It makes it real. Her voice rose, luminous, carrying through every realm, every ear. You call obedience order, but order without compassion is a wall around the living. It stops nothing from dying. It only stops life from meaning anything. Fenrin defied you because he remembered that balance is not stillness. It's motion between love and loss, between giving and letting go. The Forge's fire flickered in her eyes as she spoke. If your heaven fears movement, then it fears its own creation. The gods shouted as one, their light clashing like thunder. Half the tribunal glowed brighter, defending Astrian's law. The other half dimmed, uncertain, listening. The very sky above began to split. One side burning gold, the other silver blue, dividing like flesh around a wound. Astrion rose from his throne, his voice like a blade through stone. Enough! You would tear heaven apart with your tongue. Lyra stepped into the light that fell from the split, her hair lifted in the wind of collapsing eternity. Then maybe heaven needs to be torn apart, so it can breathe again. She turned to Fenrin. You once said mercy weighs more than reverence. Let's see if the gods remember what either feels like. She placed her hand on his chains. They burned her skin instantly, but she didn't flinch. You taught me that fear is what freezes the world. Let's thaw it. The fire within her palm flared, and for a heartbeat, the chains flickered. Astrion shouted, "Stop her!" But it was too late. The forge light within Lyra's chest erupted. The runes of obedience that made the chains cracked and fell apart like ash. Fenrin stepped forward, free once more, his form half shadow, half dawn. The gods recoiled, not in terror, but in recognition. He looked at Lyra, his expression caught between sorrow and pride. You've done it. She shook her head. No, we've just reminded them what balance feels like. The tribunal shattered. The thrones fractured down the middle. Some bathed in radiance, others swallowed by shadow. The split in heaven widened, light and dark intertwining, not as enemies but as threads of the same wound. From below, mortals looked up to see the heavens divided, one half blazing with endless day, the other shimmering with eternal twilight. Yet where the two met, new constellations were born, neither pure light nor pure dark, but living glow. Astrian's voice was faint now, almost human. You've undone eternity. Lyra's gaze softened. No, we've set it free. He looked at Fenrin. And you? What have you gained? Fenrin's answer was quiet, but it carried through the ruin, a chance to begin again. He turned to Lyra. Come, heaven can rebuild itself. The world still needs balance. And as they descended from the sundered sky, dawn and dusk followed them in equal measure. Proof that disobedience, when born from mercy, can become the truest law of all. Behind them, heaven remained split, not broken, but open. It's as forever breathing through one another like lungs rediscovering air. And in that breath, the gods finally heard what they had forgotten. That balance was not control. It was forgiveness learning to move. The air trembled before the sound was even born. The gods had fled to the edges of the firmament, and still they could feel it. The slow gathering of something older than speech, deeper than prayer. The last light of the shattered tribunal flickered around Lyra and Fenrin like the pulse of a dying star. The wolf was still bound. The chains, made of divine obedience, glowed like liquid suns, alive and merciless. They hummed with celestial verdicts, each link whispering the same command. Kneel, repent, and Lyra stood before them, her body trembling from the light that now lived inside her. Her hands bled from where she had tried to tear the chains, her mortal flesh no match for eternal law. Yet something within her refused to stop. She looked at Fenrin, at the nameless wolf whose eyes burned with defiance even in captivity. He was silent now, not from surrender, but from restraint, afraid that even his breath would feed the law that bound him. "Don't speak," she whispered. "You've spoken enough. Let me speak for you." She placed her hand upon the chains. The runes carved into them shimmered, ancient, beautiful, and cruel. They were words without mercy, created when the universe was young and truth still believed itself infallible. But beneath them, Lyra saw something else. The same runes, only older, wilder, written not by gods, but by Fenrir himself, long before language belonged to heaven. The markings of the first howl, the first balance, when sound had still been half instinct, half miracle. She understood then, words could bind, but they could also unmake. If the chains were written with the language of obedience, then she would answer with the language of freedom, using his words. She closed her eyes and began to speak. The first word left her mouth like a tremor. It wasn't in any tongue the gods had blessed. It was rough, feral, incomplete, the sound of a creature naming itself for the first time. The runes on the chains quivered. The air turned heavy, bending around her syllables. She spoke again, louder. Each word glowed faintly in the air, forming shapes, spirals, echoes, reflections of meaning that refused to stay still. She wasn't reading to the universe. She was rewriting within it. The gods watching from afar screamed without voices. Their halos dimmed, their thrones cracked. The Ethereum shook as a concept of order itself strained against her song. Fenrir opened his eyes. The runes she spoke were his, not copied, but remembered. Every word she uttered came from the marks he had carved into existence when truth was young. Each was a fragment of what had been before the gods stole language to cage creation. "Lyra," he whispered, and his breath sparked gold. "You're speaking the first tongue." She smiled through tears. "Then help me remember the rest." The air exploded with light. Fenrir began to growl, low, rhythmic, ancient. The growl was not anger. It was foundation, the sound of beginnings. It merged with Lyra's voice, weaving the first sound ever spoken with the last one yet to come. The chains shuddered. Their divine runes flared in agony, their patterns collapsing under the weight of contradiction. The fire of obedience flickered, melting into shapes it had long forbidden itself to become. The gods tried to intervene. Bolts of light fell from the upper heavens, each carrying command. Silence her. End him. Restore order. But the bolts never struck. The moment they entered the circle of Lyra's voice, they turned into feathers, then into ash, then into nothing. The forge of the sun pulsed beneath the earth, echoing her words like an anvil remembering its purpose. Mountains trembled. Rivers began to flow backward. Stars blinked, confused, rearranging themselves across the void as if trying to listen. And then the final word came. It was not loud. It was true. The chains cracked. Light poured from them like blood, spilling into the air, staining the sky with a spectrum never seen before. Neither gold nor silver, but a color that contained both stillness and motion. Fenrir stepped forward, unbound. Each pawprint he left burned with starlight that did not fade. His shadow split into two, one cast by light, the other by sound. The gods fled. Not all. Some fell to their knees, clutching their ears, weeping as their halos disintegrated. Others fled into the folds of reality, hiding in prayers and rules, in forgotten corners of memory. The ones who remained bowed their heads, not in worship, but in awe. For the first time since creation, truth had changed shape before their eyes. The Ethereum shattered, raining shards of divine crystal that turned into meteors, then into stars. Each fragment carried a new constellation, symbols of choice, mercy, imperfection. The old constellations trembled, rearranging themselves around the new. The sky began to breathe differently. Creation had been rewritten. Fenrir looked up at it, chest heaving. His fur glowed faintly. Not gold or silver, but the soft blue of twilight, the color between fear and peace. "What have we done?" he whispered. Lyra, still kneeling, her throat raw from the effort, smiled weakly. "We reminded the universe that even perfection needs to change its mind." He turned to her, voice trembling. "You've changed the shape of everything. Words like that can't be unsaid." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I said them." Above them, The heavens continued to rearrange. The constellations of war and mercy merged into a spiral. The star of judgment cracked in half, becoming twin lights, one named choice, the other forgiveness. Wherever those new stars shone, the old laws faltered. Mortals looked up and saw not commandments, but mirrors. They began to dream in languages that even gods couldn't read. The ground beneath them pulsed. The world shivered, not from fear, but from awakening. Mountains reshaped. Rivers carved new paths. Forests bloomed in impossible places. Time rippled like silk caught in a current. Every being, mortal, divine, forgotten, felt something stir inside them. Not a command, not a prophecy. A question. What if the world could be rewritten too? Fenrin looked to Lyra. You've given him choice again, but choice is chaos. She met his gaze, tired but certain. Chaos is the soil where meaning grows. He nodded slowly. Then the god will come for us again. Let them, she said. We'll just speak differently next time. A long silence followed. The stars settled into their new patterns. Heaven no longer gleamed with uniform light. It shimmered like breath, uneven, alive. Fenrin howled once more, and the sound rolled through all creation. But this time, it wasn't a cry of defiance. It was a song of continuance, a vow that balance would no longer mean stillness, but motion eternal. The sound reached even the deepest corners of night, where the old gods hid. Some wept, some knelt, some simply listened. The world tilted ever so slightly on its axis, just enough that dawn and dusk would never meet the same way again. And somewhere between those two lights, Lyra stood beside the nameless wolf, watching as the stars rearranged themselves into the shape of their words. Not a warning, not a law, but a reminder. Creation is not a sentence. It is a conversation. When the storm of unmaking had passed, silence fell upon creation. Not the cold stillness of before, but a warm, breathing quiet, as if the universe itself had stopped to listen to what it had just become. The heavens no longer glowed in uniform light. They shimmered in tones that shifted with thought, alive and uncertain. Amid the settling dust of divine ruin, Fenrin stood alone. The wolf who had once carried the river, who had howled truth into the sky, now looked upon a cosmos remade in motion. His shadow stretched across dawn and dusk alike, no longer bound to either. Lyra watched from a short distance, her form faintly transparent, her mortal years still burning inside her like soft coals. Around them, the fragments of the shattered pantheon drifted like comets, try to remember how to shine without hierarchy. And then, from the upper reaches of the sky, the gods returned. They came humbled, not as tyrants, but as remnants. Their armor was cracked, their crowns half-melted, their wings torn but luminous. They descended without thunder, their feet touching the ground gently, as if afraid to bruise it. Astrion, once keeper law, now only a figure of fading light, approached first. His voice was quieter than memory. Wolf of balance, he said, the old order is gone. The new dawn has no master. Yet it needs a guardian, one to guide its cycles, one to speak when light forgets its mercy. Behind him, the other gods bowed their heads in agreement. Take dominion, said the goddess of mercy. Shape this world as you see fit. You have earned eternity. The offer hung in the air like gold dust, shimmering, tempting. Fenrin stared at them for a long moment. His fur caught the light, not reflecting it, but softening it, as though dawn had decided to rest on him rather than rise above him. Finally he spoke. No. A whisper of disbelief moved through the gods. No. Astrion repeated. Fenrin nodded slowly. No world should be owned by the hand that saves it. The words rolled through the cosmos like distant thunder. Mountains exhaled. Rivers shifted their courses. Stars blinked uncertain. He looked at them all, divine and mortal alike. I was born of frost and silence. I hunted the sky, defied your laws, and broke your chains. Not to rule. To remind you, all of you, that balance isn't something kept by crowns or claws. It's something shared. His eyes flicked to Lyra, whose breath glowed in the half-light. Even she knew it. She gave her time, her years, her future, not to command the dawn, but to let it exist. He stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with mourning. Ownership is fear pretending to be order. If I take dominion, I become what we fought. Astrian's fading halo dimmed further. Then what would you have us do? Fenrin smiled faintly. Learn to walk without thrones. A wind stirred, gentle at first, then vast. The fragments of heaven that had fallen to earth began to rise again, but not as walls or palaces. They formed bridges of light stretching between mountains, rivers, and skies. Mortals could now walk where gods once stood, and God could descend without warping the soil. Lyra's eyes widened. You're giving it all back to them. Fenrin nodded. It was never ours. He lifted his gaze to the sun, the new sun, still trembling, still learning to shine without pride. The dawn doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to every voice that still believes light is worth waking for. The goddess of mercy stepped forward. Then what of you, Wolf of Balance? If not dominion, what remains for you? He looked down at his paws. The ground beneath them glowed faintly, a warmth that spread wherever he stepped, not as fire, but as remembrance. I walk, he said simply, until the world forgets me. And when it does, maybe that's when we'll finally be free. The gods fell silent. Some lowered their crowns completely, letting them dissolve into dust. Others wept without sound. For his refusal, they felt both loss and liberation. Lyra approached him, her face shining with quiet sorrow. If you go, who will speak for Balance? He smiled, not the smile of gods, but of something gentler, something wild. Balance doesn't need a voice anymore. It has yours. She reached for him, but her hand passed through faint light. His form was already changing. The fire of the forge that once remade him now spread outward, diffusing through every heartbeat, every sunrise. Fenrin, he shook his head. No name, just the echo of one. The air around them shimmered. He began to walk, not toward heaven or earth, but across the in-between, the glowing horizon where night and dawn shared a single breath. With each step, his paws left behind small embers that did not burn. Wherever they fell, the world grew clearer. Shadows softened, colors deepened. Even silence learned to hum with life. The gods watched in reverent silence. Astrion bowed his head. What will you be now? Fenrin paused, looking back only once. A question, he said. One the world will keep asking until it remembers the answer. He turned again and kept walking. The embers spread in a long trail behind him. Not a flame, but of illumination. Trees touched by their glow grew leaves of pale gold. Rivers reflected light from within. Even the air seemed to learn transparency, as if the veil between seen and unseen had been thinned. He passed over oceans that whispered his name, not in worship, but in gratitude. He crossed plains where newborn mortals looked up and saw his fading silhouette in the dawn, believing it to be a new constellation. And perhaps it was. When he finally reached the edge of sight, that thin rim of horizon where day first kisses the endless unknown, he stopped. The world behind him pulsed with renewal. The gods had dispersed among mortals, guiding quietly instead of ruling. Lyra stood atop a mountain, her silver hair gleaming, watching him fade into brilliance. He turned his head one last time, and their eyes met across creation's breath. She whispered, though he could not hear it, "Thank you." He did not need to. The light carried her words. Then he stepped beyond the rim, and the glow of his paws became a constellation. 12 small stars arranged in the shape of a walking wolf. They glowed neither gold nor white, but that impossible hue between, the color of freedom. In the centuries that followed, poets called that constellation the path of the nameless. Sailors used it to navigate not the sea, but choice. Children prayed to it when they couldn't find courage to speak their truth. And every dawn, just before the sun rose, the stars of the path dimmed, as if bowing quietly to let light pass. None remembered who the wolf had been, but every creature who walked the earth carried a trace of his embers in their steps. The ability to illuminate without burning, to lead without owning, to shine without taking light from another. And in that glow, the world continued, imperfect, unruled, alive. Lyra, now older than time yet still luminous, often stood at the threshold of morning and whispered to the sky, Wherever you are, I hope you kept walking. And far away, beyond the reach of gods and memory, the wolf of balance walked still, his paws leaving no scars, only light, proof that salvation does not need ownership, only movement. For as long as Dawn remembered how to share the sky, his path would never fade, because the truest dominion is refusal, and the truest light is the one that never forgets the dark. The light had forgotten how to rest. Ever since the forge reignited the heavens, the newborn sun had burned with relentless joy, shining without pause, overflowing with devotion to its own purpose. The rivers glittered endlessly, the forests gleamed, and the mountains wore crowns of gold that never dimmed. At first, mortals rejoiced. Then they began to tire. Fields refused to sleep. Flowers stayed open until they withered, and dreams, those fragile bridges between thought and renewal, grew thin and faint. The world's pulse, once rhythmic, now trembled in exhaustion, and Lyra, who had once sung the sky back into motion, heard the strain beneath the beauty. She looked at the sun and saw not arrogance, but loneliness. It did not know that light was meant to breathe, so she began to climb. The mountain she chose had no name. It stood higher than faith, older than memory. Its slopes glimmer with dust from fallen constellations, and its air smelled of stone and beginning. She carried no weapon, no torch, only the warmth of the forge within her chest and the silver thread of her final years. Each step was heavier than time. The wind tore at her, cold and sharp, but she did not falter. The higher she climbed, the more the light thinned, not in color, but in meaning. The sun's song was loud here, pure and endless, like a child who had never been taught silence. When she reached the summit, she stood alone at the lip of the world. Below her stretched a new creation, rivers of gold, forests shimmering in eternal noon, oceans glittering like unblinking eyes. Above, the sun hung close enough to touch. Its heat pressed against her skin, not cruelly, but pleadingly, like a heart afraid to stop beating. "Little one," she whispered, "you're burning yourself awake." The sun's voice was not words, but warmth. "I must shine. That's what I was made for." Lyra smiled softly. "Yes, but everything that shines must also rest, or its light becomes pain." "Rest?" asked the sun, confused. "That is what the dark wanted, to smother me." She shook her head. "No, rest isn't darkness. It's mercy." The sun trembled. Its flares flickered uncertainly, sending ripples through the heavens. "If I close my eyes, won't the world forget me? Won't they fear I'm gone?" "Maybe at first," Lyra said, "but they'll learn to trust your return. Trust is what turns fire into warmth instead of worship. And if they don't, then they'll have the stars," she said gently. "They'll remember light can take other forms." The sun was silent for a long while. It burned softly, its light deepening from gold to amber, from amber to rose. "You're afraid," Lyra murmured, "just like the sky was, just like the gods were. But listen, even fear needs to breathe." She raised her hands. From her palms drifted the last sparks of the forge's flame, the same fire that had birthed the dawn. It hovered before her, fragile as a heartbeat. "I'll show you how," she said, and she began to sing. The melody was older than the gods, older even in Fenrir's first howl. It was a song of exhale, the rhythm that teaches hearts to stop without ending, to rest without dying. The notes curled around the sun like threads of silver smoke. As she sang, her light dimmed gently, offering itself as example. The sun listened, its rays trembling like strings plucked by invisible hands. Slowly, hesitantly, its brilliance softened. The sky deepened from gold to crimson, from crimson to violet. The air grew cool. Shadows lengthened, not as enemies, but as companions. And when the sun finally blinked, just once, the world gasped. Half the earth fell into shade for the first time since its rebirth. The forest sighed. Rivers slowed. Creatures curled into themselves, discovering the shape of peace. It was the first dusk. Lyra knelt on the mountaintop, her voice fading to a whisper. "See," she said, "closing your eyes doesn't end the world. It saves it." The sun glowed softly, smaller now, calmer. "It feels strange," it admitted, "like falling, but gently." "That's what trust feels like," she said, smiling. The world will wait for you to rise again. And you? Will you be here when I wake? Lyra looked toward the horizon where Fenrin's constellation walked across the twilight. No, but I'll be in every breath they take between your rising and your rest. The sun pulsed with warmth, not heat, but gratitude. Then I will rest for you. She laughed softly. Not for me, little one, for yourself. As the sun's eyelids of flame closed completely, the last light poured gently across the mountain, kissing Lyra's skin. Her body glowed with it, translucent and peaceful. Below, the world sank into its first night. Stars bloomed like seeds freed from their shells, filling the heavens with quiet fire. Some bore the shapes of old gods, others of mortal dreams. And at the center of them all glimmered Fenrin's trail, 12 faint embers that now shone brighter than before, as if guiding the newborn dusk. The creatures of the world stirred in wonder. They had never known coolness, never seen the dance of fireflies, never heard the hush that comes before sleep. And in that hush, something miraculous happened. The earth sighed, not a sound of pain, but relief, a vast, slow exhale that rippled through rock and water, through leaf and vein. The world had learned how to breathe again. Lyra sat down upon the summit. The warmth inside her chest flickered, then dimmed, like a lantern being gently covered. She was tired, but not sad. This, she whispered, is what balance sounds like. The stars answered, their shimmer forming words not written but felt. Rest becomes sacred. And so it was. The mortals below, waking to their first night, built fires not out of fear but memory, small flames to remind them that darkness was only another shape of care. They told stories of a woman who taught the sun to sleep, and they lit candles in her honor, not to summon her back, but to thank her for leaving them both light and shadow. The gods, humbled, bowed to the new rhythm. They learned to close their eyes once each day, allowing silence to pass through them. Even Astrion, who once feared the loss of control, found solace in pause. Heaven itself began to beat again, no longer a law but a heartbeat. Light, dark. Light, dark. Live rest. Live rest. At the mountain's peak, Lyra looked upon her work. The horizon now held color enough for both joy and sorrow. The air tasted of cool gold. The newborn sun slept quietly beneath the veil of dusk, dreaming for the first time. She lay back on the stone, her silver hair mingling with the stars. It's enough, she whispered. The world will take care of itself now. The forge's light inside her chest flickered one last time, not fading, but spreading, flowing out of her into the wind. It brushed over the forest, into the seas, through the dreams of mortals and gods alike, whispering the same truth. To rest is not to end. It is to remember. By morning, when the sun opened its eyes again, the summit was empty. Only a single feather of light remained where she had lain, glowing faintly. Neither gold nor silver, but that same living hue between them, the color of mercy. The gods called her Lyra the evening singer. Mortals called her the keeper of the last word. But the sun, each time it sank beyond the horizon, called her something simpler, Mother. And so dusk became not an ending, but a promise, that even the brightest things need the grace to fade, that light's truest form is not in burning, but in knowing when to rest. And every evening thereafter, when the sun closed its eyes, the world sighed again, a quiet breath of gratitude, echoing the one that had begun it all. For the first time since creation's awakening, the universe slept not in fear but in peace. And in that sleep, everything dreamed of balance. It began with a sound that was not meant to exist, a howl that crossed the threshold between matter and memory, deep, trembling, infinite. It rose from the slopes of the mountain where Lyra had once taught the sun to rest, and it carried through every layer of being, through rivers, through roots, through blood, through thought. It was not sorrow, nor triumph. It was recognition, the voice of something that had finally understood itself. The sound expanded outward, folding through light and darkness alike. The stars, scattered across the newborn dusk, quivered at its call. One by one, they began to sing back. At first, the heavens only shimmered, faint ripples of brightness threading across the night like veins of breath. Then the constellations themselves began to move, abandoning their fixed places, no longer content to be monuments of forgotten myths. They spun slowly, reshaping, rearranging. The wolf's path curved inward, the archer's bow unwound, the ship of dawn lowered its sails. The sky, once an observer, became a participant again. Fenrir stood upon the ridge, his silhouette limned by twilight. His eyes, twin mirrors of amber and silver, reflected not the stars above, but the ones awakening around him. He had called them not to return, but to remember. The universe had always drawn its light from distance, from the illusion that divinity lived far away. But now, as his howl deepened, the distance began to close. The stars answered him not by shining brighter in the heavens, but by falling inward. Across the world, those who looked up saw the night blur, as if it had turned liquid. The sky rippled once, then folded, not collapsing, but returning. Light rained without weight. Not meteors, not fire, but dust of awareness. Particles of ancient radiance that drifted down gently, melting into everything they touched. The gods, watching from their quiet exile, shielded their eyes, unable to comprehend. "He's calling the firmament home," whispered the goddess of mercy. "He's undoing distance." And he was. Every spark that had once belonged to the vault above now sank softly into the world, into tree bark, into stone, into heartbeat and breath. The sky no longer ruled from beyond. It took residence within. The transformation was silent at first, delicate as snowfall, but mortals began to notice. A child in the valley lifted a hand in the dark and saw a faint light beneath her skin, veins glittering like constellations. A fisherman gazing into his wife's eyes saw tiny stars drifting behind her pupils, galaxies reflecting where once there had only been love. A dying elder smiled as the glow gathered the edges of his fading breath, saying softly, "The night is inside me now." Animals grew calmer. Oceans glowed faintly from within. The very air shimmered with quiet comprehension. Even the smallest insects left trails of luminescence behind them, spelling patterns that, when traced, revealed runes older than time, echoes of Fenrir's first language. The world had stopped looking up to find the divine. It now found it inward. Fenrir watched this unfold with eyes that no longer saw in lines but in currents. He could feel every pulse of light, as if it were his own heartbeat reflected 1,000-fold. He howled again, softer this time, and the sound resonated through all those hidden constellations. For the first time, mortals felt a vibration pass through them, a pulse in the soul, aligning every spark within. They didn't understand it, but they felt it, the rhythm of belonging. A man dropped his weapon and wept. A mother held her child and felt her heart mirror the stars. Priests tore down their temples, realizing prayer was not something to send, but something to listen for. And everywhere, behind every pair of eyes, light gathered, faint, flickering, alive. They began to see one another differently. The change was not merely sight. It was intimacy at a cosmic scale. When two strangers met on a road and looked into each other's eyes, they saw constellations there, familiar yet new. Some resembled old myths, others futures yet unwritten. The light pulsed gently, revealing truth, sorrow, love, and forgiveness all at once. To look into another's gaze was now to see the shared architecture of existence, to recognize that every life was a fragment of sky still learning how to shine. At first, it frightened them. So much beauty pressed so close could feel like invasion, but then awe replaced fear and reverence replaced distance. They began to bow not to gods, but to each other. Markets turned into gatherings of quiet wonder. Songs replaced speeches. When people argued, their stars dimmed. When they forgave, they flared bright again. Laws became unnecessary. Compassion became self-evident. The world had remembered itself. Lyra's name was whispered in gratitude as the evening singer, but her legend now lived through every breath taken between light and dark. Mothers taught their children to close their eyes each dusk and thank the stars behind them for resting inside. But it was Fenrir's presence they felt most deeply, though few remembered his name. His howl had become a current within creation, a low hum beneath wind and water. Every time someone spoke truth gently, every time mercy triumphed over fear, a faint echo of his sound passed through the air. The gods who had survived the breaking of order knelt upon the earth, overwhelmed. He has remade worship, Astrion murmured. No temples, no rituals, just awareness. And the goddess of mercy smiled. That's what balance was always meant to be. Not justice, not symmetry, recognition. One night, a child asked her mother, "Where do the stars go when we blink?" The mother smiled and touched the child's heart. "They go here, so they can see what we see." And in that moment, something shifted again. The sky above pulsed in rhythm with the child's heartbeat, as if confirming the truth. From that day forward, mortals no longer feared the end of light, for they carried it everywhere, and every death was merely the folding of a constellation back into the vastness within. When people wept, their tears shone softly. When they laughed, the air around them flickered. The whole world had become an organism of illumination, and night itself learned to smile. On the last night of that first age, Fenrin stood once more upon the peak where Lyra had vanished into wind. The world below shimmered like a mirror of the heavens. He gazed upward, and for the first time there was no separation between above and below. The stars were in his fur, his breath, his reflection in the snow. He lowered his head and whispered into the quiet, "You've come home." The sky, or perhaps the collective heart of all living things, answered with a single pulse of light that spread in every direction. Mountains glowed. Oceans breathed. The sun, resting beneath the horizon, exhaled warmth even in sleep. Fenrin's eyes softened. "Good. Stay." He lifted his head once more and gave one final howl, long, low, and full of gratitude. The sound rolled across the horizon, through the layers of dream and waking, through history itself. It was not a command or a warning. It was a blessing, the acknowledgement that light and life had learned to coexist, not as master and servant, but as reflections of the same longing. When the echo faded, only peace remained. No more gods above, no more mortals below, only one endless sky, breathing inside all things. And so, when people met in the soft hours of twilight, they no longer pointed upward to make wishes. They looked into one another's eyes, saw galaxies blooming behind familiar faces, and whispered the words that had replaced prayer. "I see your stars." And in those simple words, the universe found its new language, not carved in stone or sung by the divine, but carried in every heartbeat that dared to look back and shine. Long after the stars had come home to live inside all hearts, when the world pulsed in quiet equilibrium, a new stillness began to gather along the edges of the ocean. It was not the silence of loss nor the pause before birth. It was something gentler, older, and full of farewell. Those who lived by the shore felt it first. The waves changed their rhythm. Tides that had once rushed and retreated in ceaseless dance now lingered, moving as if savoring every moment of touch against the sand. The wind softened, carrying the scent of salt and memory. Flocks of seabirds circled slowly, calling out to no one, as though waiting for something sacred to arrive. And then at dawn's threshold, when light and reflection were still indistinguishable, Thalen, god of the old seas, returned. He rose not from storm, as in the days of divine command, but from calm. The water parted quietly, revealing his form shaped of mist and moonlight. His hair was kelp turned to silver. His eyes, the deep green of depths that had forgotten sunlight. Gone was the armor of coral and pearl he had once worn when ruling the waves. In its place hung a robe woven from foam, frayed and luminous, each thread a forgotten prayer whispered by sailors and widows alike. He carried no trident, no symbol of dominion, only a small crown, crusted with age, its jewels dulled by time and salt. The sea around him sighed in recognition. The world, even in its reborn harmony, remembered his name. He had been there when the first drop of water touched the first grain of sand. He had wept when mortals learned to build ships and drift beyond safety. He had raged when the gods demanded storms to punish instead of heal. Now, he came not to reclaim, but to release. Lyra felt his arrival before she saw him. Standing on the cliffs where Fenrin's trail of embers ended, she looked toward the horizon and saw the ocean glowing faintly, as if breathing light. The waves did not crash. They bowed. Fenrin's voice, or the echo of it, stirred beside her, soft as wind and fur. "He's come home, too." She descended the path to the shore. Each step left a faint shimmer in the sand, as though the sea itself welcomed her approach. When she reached the water's edge, Thalen was waiting. He smiled faintly, an expression filled with the weight of ages. "Evening, singer," he said, bowing his head. His voice carried the cadence of distant tides, gentle but unending. "You have done what none of you else could." Lyra shook her head. "I only taught light to breathe." "And in doing so," Thalen replied, "you taught the sea to listen." She studied him. This once mighty god now dimmed, yet more beautiful in humility than he had ever been in command. "Why have you returned?" she asked. "The world no longer needs rulers." "Not to rule," he said. "To remember. The sea has carried every voice that ever lived, every echo of creation's rise and fall. It remembers the gods even when they forget themselves." He lifted the crown in his hands. It was smaller than she expected, fragile, like something carved for a child. The jewels flickered faintly, their light caught between exhaustion and relief. "This crown was forged when Dominion still believed itself mercy," he said. "Every storm I called, every calm I granted, every ship I sank or spared, all answered to this." Lyra frowned softly. "And now the seas no longer need a hand to command them," Thalen said. "They have found rhythm in their own tides. They rise and fall for no one, not even me." He looked at the crown a final time, then at the horizon, where water met light in seamless unity. "I came to give it back to the silence." He waded into the surf, each step dissolving part of him into mist. The ocean glowed brighter where his feet touched, as though the waves themselves whispered farewell. When the water reached his knees, he turned back to her. "There was a time when silence ruled all things," he said. "Before the first wind, before the first song, there was a stillness of thought unborn. We gods tried to shape it. You mortals learned to fill it. But even silence must rest." Lyra felt tears rise, not of grief, but of reverence. "Will you rest with it?" He smiled a soft, knowing curve. "I already am." He lifted the crown one last time, kissed its corroded edge, and placed it upon the surface of the sea. For a heartbeat it floated, gleaming faintly in the light of morning, then began to sink. The waves did not swallow it. They cradled it downward. As it vanished, the sea changed color, from silver to a deep, radiant blue that no mortal eye had ever seen. It was a hue of serenity, of endings accepted without sorrow. The waters hummed once, a single, perfect tone that lingered in the air long after the crown was gone. Thalen looked upward. The stars within the sky flickered faintly, reflecting in his eyes. "The world is awake now," he said. "It doesn't need gods to keep it alive, only those who remember what rest means." "Where will you go?" Lyra asked. "Where all tides go," he replied. "Back to the stillness beneath motion, back to the quiet before the first wave." His body began to dissolve, not disintegrate, but blend, as if the sea itself were reclaiming him. His voice lingered, woven through the wind. "Tell them," he said, "that peace is not stillness without sound. It is sound that no longer fears itself." The last of his form melted into the foam. A ripple spread outward, touching every shore in the world, calm, gentle, infinite. Every ocean creature, from the smallest plankton to the oldest whale, paused for a heartbeat, as though bowing. Then the sea fell quiet again. Thalen was gone, but his presence remained. The tides continued their rhythm, now softer, more deliberate. Waves no longer struck with fury. They exhaled. The sound of surf changed, no longer roaring, but whispering in cadence with the wind. Fishermen noticed first. Nets returned heavy not with fish, but with light. Pearls formed more readily, and storms began to circle wide around coastal villages, choosing to pass rather than consume. The oceans had learned gentleness. They had learned to sleep. Children playing by the water could sometimes hear a hum beneath the waves, a lullaby, faint and wordless, that lulled even grief itself. Sailors whispered that it was Thalen's final hymn, reminding the world that even vastness deserved rest. That night, when dusk folded the sun into dream, Lyra returned to the shore. The sand still glowed faintly where the crown had sunk. She knelt there, touching the wet earth, feeling the heartbeat of the tide echoing within her own. For a moment, she thought she heard Fenrin's distant howl, a resonance meeting Thalin's fading chord, completing a harmony too vast for language. The sea shimmered, and she smiled. "Rest well, oh God," she whispered. "The silence is in good hands now." A single wave rolled up to her feet and broke gently, leaving behind a smooth shell. Inside it glowed a small, steady light, not bright but patient. She pressed it to her ear, and for an instant she heard his voice one last time. Every sound ends where silence begins. But endings are only places that learn how to listen. The shell dimmed, and the sea carried it away. And from that day onward, the oceans no longer reflected the sky above. They reflected the sky within. Stars twinkled beneath the waves as they did behind mortal eyes, and the surface of every sea mirrored both heaven and heart. Fishermen said that if you looked deep enough, you could still see Thalin's crown resting at the bottom, encircled by coral that glowed like lanterns. None dared to disturb it. They called it the sleeping crown, and every time the tide went still, they whispered thanks. For they knew that peace, once a dream of gods, had finally learned to live in water and in them. And when the moon rose each night to guide the tides, its reflection would ripple softly, as though smiling, whispering through the surf the words that had ended an age. Even silence must rest. It began with a dimming, not of the sun nor the stars, but of the night itself. For ages, since Lyra had taught the sun to rest, dusk and dawn had moved in graceful rhythm, sharing the world like two dancers exchanging a single step. Between them lived the night, patient, vast, contemplative, the keeper of silence, the vessel of sleep. But now, after the stars had descended into mortal hearts and the gods had learned humility, the night found itself fading. There were no more boundaries to protect, no fears to cradle. Shadows had turned to teachers. Darkness had lost its teeth. And though the world had found peace, the night had grown lonely. It began to weaken first at the edges. The constellations behind mortal eyes still glowed, but the real heavens, those vast, cold stretches that once sang to wolves and wanderers, were thinning, losing color. The moon still floated, but her light trembled like a heartbeat nearing its last measure. Lyra noticed it one evening, while walking along the quiet shore, where Thalin's crown had been surrendered. The waves were still, the air soft with sleep, but the sky above her seemed tired. The stars blinked slower. The horizon sagged beneath the weight of its own stillness. "Where are you?" she whispered to the dark. "Why do you hide?" A voice answered, soft as breath upon glass. "I am not hiding," it said. "I am leaving." The air shimmered. Out of the thinning dust stepped a shape woven of absence and memory. The night, still cloaked in shadow, yet faint, translucent. Her hair moved like smoke caught between worlds, her eyes reflecting the remnants of stars that once ruled the heavens. She was no longer fearsome. She was fragile, magnificent in her dying. "Evening singer," she said, her tone neither sorrowful nor bitter. "You have done well. The world breathes. The sun sleeps. The gods rest. But there is no need for me anymore." Lyra's heart clenched. "That isn't true. We still need you, your quiet, your space to dream." The night smiled faintly. "No, little mortal light. You needed me when darkness was a cage. Now it is only a mirror." She looked upward, where her own fabric was dissolving into the twilight. When fear disappears, so too does the shadow that held it. I have no purpose left but to end. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes shining with tears that reflected constellations. "If you end, what becomes of rest? Of mystery? Of wonder?" "Those are yours now," said the night gently. "The stars are within you. Mystery lives behind your eyelids. My work is complete." "But you are beauty itself," Lyra whispered, "the first to teach us all." The night tilted her head. "Then remember me kindly." That was all she asked. No worship, no lament, just remembrance, soft and truthful, without fear or shame. "I will," Lyra promised. "I will remember you in every quiet breath before sleep. I will remember you in the hush between songs." The night's expression softened, her form flickering like a candle nearing peace. "Then perhaps," she murmured, "I need not truly die." The sea stirred, listening. The moon leaned closer, trembling. Across the world, those who slept that night felt something vast and tender hover over them. Not darkness, not light, but warmth behind their thoughts, waiting to take shape. The night looked to Lyra once more. "If I cannot remain as shadow," she said, "then let me remain as memory. Let me be the space where even gods can close their eyes without fear. Promise me that mortals will still know how to wander, even when awake." "I promise," said Lyra. "Then take what remains of me," the night said, stepping forward. "Keep me in the space between sight and silence. Let me become dream." She reached out, placing her hand upon Lyra's chest. The touch was cool, like the edge of sleep, like the first inhale before surrender. The darkness that had once cloaked the world now flowed gently into Lyra's heart, not as power, but as invitation. Every star within her flickered, adjusting, making room. And in that moment, a new realm unfurled. Not sky, not sea, not waking or death, but something in between. The night's voice echoed, already fading. "This is my last gift. A place where fear can rest without being banished. A bridge for all who must cross between memory and becoming." Her body dissolved entirely now, scattering like ash into the wind, like ink spilled into light. And from that union of shadow and breath, dream was born. At first, the world did not understand. People slept and woke as always, but their rest was different, deeper, more luminous. They began to see visions not of God on high, but themselves among them, walking hand in hand, laughing in fields of starlight. Children spoke in their sleep with voices not their own, old souls returning to whisper secrets of mercy. Artists woke weeping with images of lands they'd never seen but somehow remembered. The dying drifted peacefully, seeing loved ones waiting at the far edge of their dreams. And always behind those visions there lingered the faint, kind presence of a woman made of night, watching, humming softly. Mortals began to understand that dream was eternal half-light, the tender scene between being and becoming, where nothing ruled and everything met. In dream, gods and mortals walked together without rank or fear. The gods came quietly humbled, to learn from those they once commanded. The mortals came softly, curious, to remember what divinity looked like when stripped of power. They met in endless meadows of luminous dusk, where rivers glowed like veins of starlight, and every step left ripples of song. They shared memories, traded burdens, and left transformed. No throne, no chain, no law survived there, only stories, whispered and rewritten. The gods began to understand that their immortality was not dominion but continuity, a promise to exist wherever imagination needed them. And mortals began to realize that their fragility was not curse but choice, the gift of learning, of ending, of meaning something because time was short. All this born from Lyra's promise. On the mountain where she had once taught the sun to rest, Lyra stood again. Around her, dusk breathed in gentle rhythm. She could feel the night within her, quiet but alive, stretching across the world through dreams. She closed her eyes and listened. The murmur of sleepers reached her, billions of small sighs overlapping into one immense, serene chord. The sound filled her with warmth, as if the world itself were whispering gratitude each time it dreamed. Fenrin's howl could sometimes be heard in those dreams, soft, woven through laughter and peace. The stars that fled heaven now drifted through people's slumber, forming constellations of memory that only hearts could see. And the night, though gone, lived on as dream, visiting every soul gently, asking only to be remembered kindly. That evening, as the first moon rose over the horizon, Lyra whispered to the air, "You are remembered." The wind responded with shimmer of color, hues no waking eye could name. The sea echoed the phrase in waves, and the mountains repeated it in their deep, slow tremor. And somewhere in the realm between sleeping and waking, a voice, soft as velvet, endless as sky, replied, "Then I am not gone. I am only resting." From that night forward, mortals no longer feared sleep. They entered it as pilgrims enter a sacred hall. They understood that the night was no longer a void but mirror, a gathering place of everything loved and yet unfinished. Children who woke crying from bad dreams were told, "The night is still learning to rest. Let's help her by dreaming kinder." And when people died, their loved ones whispered, "She will meet you in the half-light." Dream became the last temple, invisible yet infinite, one that needed no walls, no priests, no offering but remembrance. And so it was said through generations that from kindness came memory, from memory came dream, and from dream came peace. At the end of her long journey, Lyra looked once more upon the horizon, the scene between day and night, waking and rest, life and everything beyond. She smiled softly, feeling the night breathe through her one last time. "Sleep now," she whispered to the sky. "We'll keep the dream alive." And as the world drifted into twilight, a hush spread across creation, not of ending but of contentment. The gods closed their eyes. The mortals followed. And within every mind, the same gentle voice whispered, echoing Lyra's promise across eternity. Even silence must rest, and in its rest it dreams. It came without announcement. No thunder, no flame, no chorus of angels proclaiming triumph. Only breath, the kind that trembles when the world is still half asleep, when creation itself inhales and hesitates, unsure whether to open its eyes again. The horizon quivered, thin as a pulse beneath translucent skin. The stars, now living quietly inside every creature, flickered in unison, sensing what was about to unfold. Time, that long and restless river, paused mid-current as if to listen, and then, softly, so softly it almost didn't happen, light returned, not as a shout, as a sigh. It began at the edges of the sea, where the last traces of Thalin's farewell still shimmered in the depths. The water reflected not a sky above, but a sky within, an ocean of tiny lights flickering from the hearts of fish, from coral breathing in rhythm with the tide. Each spark swelled faintly, uncoordinated at first, then gradually together, a silent agreement written in glow. And from that gentle union rose the first color of the new dawn, not blinding gold, but humble amber, threaded with blue and silver. The kind of light that didn't demand to be seen, but invited the world to wake at its own pace. It touched the waves with fingers of warmth. It brushed across the sand, coaxing shadows to stretch and sigh instead of flee. It climbed the trunks of sleeping trees, whispering through leaves that unfurled not in fear, but in welcome. Everywhere it went, the light didn't replace the dark. It spoke with it. For the first time, light and darkness stood side by side and saw each other clearly. The light said, "I am motion." The dark said, "I am memory." And between them, the air answered, "Then together you are breath." The dawn deepened, neither conquest nor retreat, only cooperation. Where the light flowed, the dark softened. Where the dark lingered, the light turned golden with gratitude. The world had never seen such balance before. Even the gods, now scattered among mortal hearts, felt it. They stirred within dreams and watched, silent and awed, as their old thrones became irrelevant under this new, tender equilibrium. No single force claimed victory. For once, creation did not need to win. It only needed to begin. Lyra felt it from the mountain peak, the warmth brushing against her fading form, the pulse of light threading through the night's last dream. Though her body was nearly spirit now, she could still feel the sunrise like a heartbeat echoing her own. "So gentle," she whispered, "as it should have always been." The wind answered with Fenrir's distant voice. Not words, but a low rumble of approval carried through the morning air. His presence was everywhere now, in the spaces between birdsong and the rhythm of tide and pulse. He howled once, softly this time, and the light trembled as though bowing. The first sunrise listened, acknowledging its twin. No longer enemies, no longer extremes. Just one long, continuous exhale shared between them. The newborn light wandered inland, cautious but curious. It crossed valleys where the grass still glistened from night's tears. It touched rivers and found them already shimmering with reflections of inner stars. It reached sleeping animals and brushed their fur until they stirred, blinking, unafraid. Even stones glowed faintly, their rough faces catching hints of gold as though remembering warmth they had never known. The light paused often, as if uncertain of its right to exist. And every time it hesitated, the darkness reassured it, wrapping it softly, whispering, "Go on, I will follow you, we will move together." And so they did. They learned to coexist like breath and heartbeat, like waking and dream. Each made the other visible. The world, for the first time in all its endless becoming, understood itself. When the sun finally breached the horizon, it did so without ceremony. It rose shyly, its disk of pale amber, glowing not as a king but as a guest. The ocean mirrored it with unbroken affection, and the mountains bowed their peaks without fear being burned. No heralds, no firestorms, no shouts of divine victory. Just the quiet joy of cooperation made visible. The birds began to sing, not because they were commanded by the light, but because it felt safe to do so. Their songs carried through the valleys like threads of silver, each note with a memory of the night transformed into sound. The first wind of day wandered between them, gathering the melodies like offerings. It carried them across forests and fields, weaving music through the air. It was a song of balance, the hymn of a world that had finally learned to wake gently. In villages below, mortals stirred from their first dreams. They stepped outside their homes, blinking against the soft radiance, expecting awe or fear. But the light didn't demand either. It touched them like an equal, warm on their faces, cool on their eyelids. Some wept quietly without knowing why. They felt the night still breathing within the dawn, felt their hearts echo with both stillness and motion. Children laughed and pointed at their shadows, surprised to find them friendly. Farmers pressed their palms to the earth and fell to hum, the soil alive with light that didn't blind but nourished. The oldest among them looked at the sky and whispered, "This is how the world should have begun." And so it did, again. Lyra knelt upon the mountain top, tears glimmering. She knew she was fading, her form turning translucent with the morning. But she wasn't sorrowful. She had lived to see creation's gentlest miracle. The day learning to rise without shame, the light remembering its humility. She pressed her hands into the soil, feeling its warmth seep through her. "Stay kind," she murmured. "Stay soft." The earth pulsed back, a low thrum that was half gratitude, half heartbeat. The sky responded with color, not one hue but many, blending gold with rose, lilac with silver. It was as if dawn itself blushed at being seen. And in that blush, the world took its first full breath. The gods who still lingered not above but within felt it ripple through every living thing. Some wept, realizing they were no longer needed. Others smiled, realizing they were finally home. Astrion, the former keeper of divine law, stood in the body of fishermen and watched the sunrise reflected in the sea. "So this is what freedom feels like," he whispered. The waves answered with laughter. The goddess of mercy, reborn as a healer, felt her patient's heartbeat sync with the rhythm of dawn. "So soft," she said and smiled. The light moved through all of them, gods, mortals, trees, oceans, not as ruler, but as relationship. Every particle of existence was now a conversation. Creation no longer obeyed. It listened. As the morning expanded, every edge of the world shimmered. The last remnants of the old night folded into the folds of dream, where mortals and gods could meet without hierarchy. The sun rose higher, but even its brilliance remained tender, never overreaching. Shadows lingered where they chose, not out of defiance, but as reminders that warmth and coolness belonged to the same breath. The world began again, humble, golden, and unguarded. It had no name for this peace yet, no word for a beginning that wasn't war. But the air carried it anyway. It vibrated in the leaves, glowed in the oceans, and pulsed in every heart. And those who lived to see it would later tell their children. There was a day when the sun rose for the first time, and it did not conquer the dark. It spoke with it, and together they made the world. Far beyond words and memory, Fenrin's constellation watched within every living gaze. He didn't howl now. He only breathed. Through wind, through tide, through all things that moved. Lyra's promise lingered in every dusk, her kindness cradling every pause. And when the second sunrise came, the one after this, it too rose without trumpet or command, learning from first how to be gentle. Because once the world had begun in humility, it could never again begin in fear. The universe had learned its lesson. Creation, at last, remembered its purpose, to keep breathing, softly, together, forever. Centuries passed. The age of gods faded into memory, and the world grew quiet with its own rhythms. Kingdoms rose and fell like tides. Forests swallowed the ruins of temples that once sang to the heavens. The stars, now dwelling inside every heart, glowed faintly through generations, reminders not of worship, but belonging. And yet, when the wind sighed across empty valleys or curled through the passes of old mountains, there were those who stopped and listened. They would tilt their heads to the horizon and whisper, "Did you hear that?" For in that wind was a low, mournful tone, a note too deep to be mere weather, too alive to be chance. Some called it echo, others memory, but the oldest among them smiled knowingly and said, "It is the wolf." They told stories around firelight, voices hushed as though the very night might be listening. "There was once a wolf," the storytellers began, "born of frost and silence. He hunted the sky itself and found it hiding behind fear. When gods fell and mortals rose, he chose neither throne nor crown. He walked instead far, far away, to the border creation where light and dark meet like old friends. Children would lean closer. Does he still walk there?" The elders nodded slowly. "Perhaps. For when dawn comes too early, the wolf holds it back until the stars have finished their dreaming. And when night lingers too long, he lifts his head and howls, and the sun remembers its courage." They called him many names: Fenrin, the balance keeper, the shadowed flame, the breath between worlds. But most simply called him the wolf who waits. No one could say for certain where he lived. Some claimed they had seen him wandering the northern wastes, his fur made of twilight, his eyes twin embers glowing through snowstorms. Others swore he roamed the deserts, chasing mirages, each footprint birthing an oasis before vanishing into sand. Sailors spoke of glimpsing him running upon the surface of the sea at dawn, his reflection shimmering beneath the waves, never sinking. And shepherds in the hills said that on still mornings, when the fog lay thick as breath, a great silhouette moved among the mists, pausing only to listen, as if measuring the heartbeat of the earth itself. None could agree whether he was body or wind, myth or mercy, but all agreed on one thing. When he howled, the world listened. It was said that his howl could wake the sun, not by command, but by invitation. The sound carried through everything that breathed, through stone, leaf, feather, and dream. It was not loud, yet it traveled farther than thunder. When he howled, even the smallest creatures stirred, knowing something vast had remembered them. When he howled, oceans shifted their tides, matching their rhythm to his breath. And when he howled, the line between night and day trembled, not in fear, but in joy, as if both halves of the world had clasped hands once more. To the people, that sound became a promise, that no dawn would ever rise alone, and no darkness would ever fall unloved. As generations passed, stories of the wolf changed shape but never vanished. Poets wrote of him in verses that blurred truth and dream. They said his footsteps left trails of starlight that blossomed into fireflies each night. Painters imagined him walking along the rim of the world, each exhale scattering new constellations into the air. Singers carried his legend into lullabies, songs mothers hummed to their children when the sky felt too wide, too empty. And through it all one phrase endured, spoken quietly before every sunrise. "Listen, the wolf is calling the light again." Once every century, travelers claimed to have seen him. They spoke of a vast shadow at the horizon, moving like breath, shimmering between form and wind. They described his eyes, not gold, not silver, but the color of warmth itself, the hue that lives between goodbye and beginning. He never approached. He only watched. And then, before the first light touched the land, he would lift his head and sing, a single note that hung between worlds. Some said the sun rose from his throat. Others said the sound was what kept it gentle. A few even whispered that his howl wasn't a call at all, but a conversation, one half of an eternal dialogue between all that ends and all that begins. And when they finished telling it, their voices would always soften, because deep down, everyone who had ever watched the sunrise wanted to believe they'd heard him too. In time, the scholars tried to explain him away. They said the wolf of dawn was only the wind shaped by mountain passes, or the low hum of glaciers moving beneath the earth. They called it resonance, a natural vibration of the world, not a song. But even they could not explain why, on mornings when sorrow weighed heavy, that sound grew louder, or why, during wars and famines, the dawn always seemed to come just when people stopped hoping it would. And so the myth endured, untouched by reason, shining quietly in the corners of hearts that still believed in kindness without proof. Because sometimes faith isn't the absence of doubt, it's the courage to listen anyway. Those who traveled far enough, pilgrims, poets, wanderers, swore that at the end of the world, there's indeed a place where light and dark shake hands, a plain of gold and shadow, where the air glows like water and the ground hums with the heartbeat of creation. There, they said, stands a single figure, part wolf, part wind, part memory. His fur ripples like flame in slow motion. His breath smells of both sea and snow. When he moves, the horizon bends with him. He is neither alive nor gone, neither God nor ghost. He is the pause between, the breath between, the bridge that never breaks. And when the first color of sunrise spills across that land, he bows his head, not in prayer, but in greeting, as if saying to the light, "Welcome back, old friend." Others believe he no longer walks at all. They say he became the wind itself, the hum that stirs the air before sunrise, the invisible warmth that nudges the world awake. They say every dawn begins with him passing to the lungs of the living, a single breath shared by all things. The wolf is the reason every creature exhales just before the sun appears, that instinctive release, that tiny surrender to what is coming. He is a reminder that beginnings require gentleness, that no light truly rises without listening first to the darkness that held it. Sometimes on the coldest mornings, when fog curls low and dew trembles on every blade of grass, you can hear him, not as a howl, but as a hum woven through silence, the sound of balance remembering itself. And so centuries turned to millennia, and even those stories aged into whispers. Yet one truth refused to fade, passing through time as steady as heartbeat, as quiet as dawn. The sky was never stolen. It was shared. The gods had not fallen from grace. They had stepped aside. The wolf had not conquered the heavens. He had simply reminded them that light belonged to all who could see it. Each sunrise, each shadow, each breath of wind still carried that truth. The stars inside every living being still flickered in rhythm with it. Children born under storm or moonlight grew up knowing it without words, that the world was never divided between above and below, good and evil, day and night. It was built on sharing, the endless exchange of warmth and stillness, of giving and yielding, of voice and silence. And so the story of the wolf endured, not as myth, not as history, but as memory itself. At the edge of every dawn, there is still a breath, long, low, patient. The trees hold it. The sea answers, and somewhere in that meeting, something vast and kind begins again. It has no name now, no crown, no worshippers. Only the whisper carried in the wind. The wolf still walks. And when the sun rises, soft and golden as forgiveness, the world remembers, not who began it, nor who will end it, but why it breeds at all. Because once, long ago, a nameless wolf refused to own the sky, and in doing so, he taught it how to be shared. And from that gift, gentle, eternal, and unguarded, every dawn since has learned how to rise.